Hello there, and welcome to Sleep Orion. Tonight, we journey across time and ocean to witness one of the most audacious experiments in human history. A voyage that defied experts, challenged conventions, and dared to prove that ancient peoples could cross the world's largest ocean on nothing more than balsa logs lashed together with rope. This is the story of Kon-Tiki. A primitive raft, 6 men, and 4,300 miles of open Pacific water stretching between Peru and Polynesia. It is a tale of obsession and courage, of scholarly dispute transformed into physical adventure, of faith in forgotten technologies and trust in the ancient wisdom of vanished civilizations. Before we begin, if you enjoy these quiet journeys through history, I invite you to like, subscribe, or share a thought in the comments. It helps others find their way here too. One sleepy soul at a time. For now, just breathe. Let your eyes grow heavy. And let the rhythm of distant waves carry you across an ocean of time to a moment when one man's theory became the adventure of a lifetime. Let's begin. The year is 1914, and in a small Norwegian town called Larvik, a boy is born who will one day challenge everything the academic world believes about human migration. His name is Thor Heyerdahl, and from his earliest days, he is captivated by the natural world. He collects specimens, studies animals, dreams of distant lands painted in the pages of adventure books. His father, a brewer, and his mother, a museum chairman, encourage his curiosity. The family home becomes a menagerie of creatures, a laboratory of childhood wonder. As Thor grows, so does his fascination with the world beyond Norway's shores. He studies zoology and geography at the University of Oslo, but his mind wanders farther than textbooks can reach. He reads accounts of Pacific islands, of mysterious stone statues on Easter Island, of Polynesian legends that speak of gods arriving from the east. The prevailing theories of his time state with certainty that Polynesia was settled from Asia, that ancient peoples island hopped westward across the Pacific, carried by sophisticated navigation and favorable winds. But Thor Heyerdahl begins to wonder. What if everyone is wrong? In 1937, newly married to his wife Liv, Thor makes a decision that will shape the rest of his life. He and Liv leave civilization behind and travel to the Marquesas Islands in French Polynesia, settling on the remote island of Fatu Hiva. Their plan is simple yet profound, to live as the ancients did, to understand Polynesian culture not through books but through experience. They build a hut of bamboo and palm fronds. They eat breadfruit and fish. They learn the rhythms of island life, the patterns of wind and wave that governed existence for countless generations. It is here, in this isolated paradise, that Thor notices something remarkable. The trade winds blow steadily from the east, pushing everything westward toward Polynesia from the coast of South America. The ocean currents, particularly the Humboldt Current, flow in the same direction. Thor studies the plants growing on the islands and recognizes species native to South America, the sweet potato, the bottle gourd, plants that could not have arrived by chance. He examines the massive stone platforms called ahu, the towering moai statues of Easter Island, and sees in their construction techniques echoes of ancient South American civilizations. Thor begins collecting legends, stories passed down through generations of Polynesian oral tradition. Again and again, he hears tales of a great leader named Kon-Tiki, sometimes called Tiki or Kon-Tiki Viracocha. The legends describe him as a sun god, a fair-skinned man with a beard, a chief who led his people across the ocean from a land where the sun rises. Thor knows that South America lies to the east, the direction of the rising sun. He knows that in Peru, the Inca worshipped a creator god named Viracocha, often depicted with a beard and light skin, a deity who legend said departed westward across the Pacific after his people turned against him. The theory crystallizes in Thor's mind like salt from seawater. What if the first Polynesians did not come from Asia at all? What if they came from South America, carried westward by wind and current on rafts of balsa wood, the same lightweight, buoyant timber that grows in abundance along the coasts of Ecuador and Peru. What if Kon-Tiki was not a myth but a memory, a historical figure whose actual journey had been transformed by time into legend? Thor and Liv return to Norway as World War II engulfs Europe. Thor serves in the Norwegian resistance, his mind still churning with questions about ancient migrations. When the war ends, he begins presenting his theory to the academic community. He writes papers. He gives lectures. He points to the botanical evidence, the linguistic similarities, the archaeological parallels between South American and Polynesian cultures. The response is dismissive, sometimes contemptuous. Scholars shake their heads. Anthropologists cite genetic studies, linguistic research, archaeological evidence that overwhelmingly supports an Asian origin for Polynesians. They explain that Polynesians were master navigators with sophisticated double-hulled canoes, that they could sail against wind and current using their intimate knowledge of stars, waves, and bird migrations. They argue that a balsa raft, primitive and unsteerable, could never make such a journey. The ocean is too vast, the challenge is too great. Thor's theory is labeled speculation, fantasy, pseudoscience. But Thor Heyerdahl is not a man easily deterred. If scholars will not accept his theory based on circumstantial evidence, then he will prove it can be done. He will build a raft exactly as the ancient South Americans would have built it, using only materials and methods available to them 1,500 years ago. He will sail it from Peru to Polynesia, riding the same winds and currents that his theoretical ancestors rode. If he succeeds, it will demonstrate that such a journey was possible, that contact between South America and Polynesia could have occurred in ancient times. It is an audacious plan. Critics call it suicidal. Friends worry for his sanity. But Thor is resolute. He begins seeking funding, searching for crew members willing to risk their lives on a raft that many believe will sink within days of leaving port. The challenge of financing the expedition proves nearly insurmountable. Museums decline his requests. Scientific institutions refuse support for what they view as a publicity stunt rather than legitimate research. Thor approaches military contacts, government officials, private donors. He takes out loans, mortgages his possessions, scrapes together every penny he can find. Slowly, painfully, the funding comes together. The United States Army Quartermaster Corps agrees to provide field rations in exchange for reports on their effectiveness. Equipment manufacturers donate gear in hopes of publicity. Thor's publisher advances money against a book about the journey. Now comes the task of assembling a crew. Thor needs men who combine specific technical skills with the temperament to endure months at sea on a primitive raft. He needs experts in radio, navigation, engineering, photography, men who can document the journey scientifically while surviving its dangers. Above all, he needs men willing to trust their lives to balsa logs and hemp rope. The first to volunteer is Herman Watzinger, an engineer with expertise in technical measurements. Herman is methodical, precise, drawn to the challenge of collecting data under extreme conditions. He will monitor weather patterns, wave heights, current speeds, drift rates, everything needed to understand the journey scientifically. Knut Haugland joins next, a radio operator decorated by the British for his role in the Norwegian heavy water sabotage during World War II. Knut's wartime experience hiding behind German lines, transmitting intelligence under constant threat of discovery, has prepared him for isolation and risk. He will maintain contact with the outside world, ensuring the expedition's safety and allowing them to report their progress. Joining Knut is Torstein Robbie, another radio expert and war hero who spent months concealed near the German battleship Tirpitz, secretly transmitting its position to Allied forces. Together, Knut and Torstein will operate the raft's radio equipment, powered by batteries and a hand-cranked generator, keeping the expedition connected to civilization across thousands of miles of ocean. Eric Hesselberg signs on as navigator and artist. Eric is an old friend of Thor's, a skilled sailor with experience reading charts and calculating positions by sextant. He is also a talented illustrator who will document the journey in sketches and paintings. His artistic eye will capture moments that photographs cannot: the play of light on water, the expression of men facing the unknown. The final crew member is Bengt Danielsson, a Swedish sociologist and anthropologist studying human migration. Bengt speaks Spanish fluently, a crucial skill for the time they will spend in South America preparing the raft. He will serve as steward, managing supplies and daily rations. More importantly, his academic background will lend credibility to the expedition's findings. 6 men. 6 different personalities and skill sets, all united by willingness to risk everything for an idea that most of the world considers madness. In late 1946, Thor and Herman traveled to Ecuador to begin the most critical phase of preparation, finding and harvesting the balsa logs that will form the raft's foundation. Balsa trees grow in the rainforests of Ecuador, their wood so light and porous that it floats high in water while remaining remarkably strong. The ancient South Americans, particularly the cultures along the coast of Ecuador and Peru, used balsa extensively in their raft construction, as recorded by Spanish conquistadores who witnessed these vessels during their invasion of the Inca Empire. Thor and Herman trek into the jungle, guided by local woodsmen who know where the largest balsa trees grow. They need logs of specific dimensions, long, straight, thick enough to support the weight of 6 men and their supplies, yet not so heavy that the raft will sit too low in the water. The trees they select must be mature but not old, still full of the lightness that makes balsa unique among timbers. The harvest is arduous work. Each tree is felled by hand, stripped of branches, hauled through dense jungle to the nearest river. The logs float downstream to the coast, where Thor examines each one, rejecting those with cracks or weak spots, selecting the finest specimens for his raft. He chooses 9 main logs, the largest measuring 45 feet in length and 2 feet in diameter. These 9 logs will form the raft's body, the platform that must carry them across 4,300 miles of ocean. From Ecuador, the logs are transported to Peru, to the port city of Callao near Lima. Here, with the permission and assistance of Peruvian authorities, construction begins in earnest. Thor has studied every available description of ancient South American rafts, examining drawings made by Spanish chroniclers, reading accounts of how these vessels were built. No nails will be used, no metal of any kind in the raft structure. Everything must be lashed together with rope, exactly as the ancients did it. The 9 main balsa logs are laid parallel, their forward ends cut to points to reduce water resistance. The logs vary slightly in length, the longest in the center, creating a rough boat shape when viewed from above. Across these main logs, crossbeams of lighter balsa are lashed at 3-foot intervals, providing lateral support and helping distribute weight. The lashing is done with hemp rope, thick as a man's thumb, wound and tied in traditional patterns that allow the structure to flex with the waves rather than fighting against them. Between the balsa logs, lengths of pine are wedged to serve as centerboards. These can be lowered or raised to help with steering, providing the raft with directional control that skeptics insist is impossible. Thor has studied Spanish accounts that describe such centerboards, and he is determined to prove that ancient rafts were not helpless vessels at the mercy of current and wind, but could be steered and to some degree navigated. The mast is constructed from lengths of mangrove wood lashed together in an A-frame configuration, standing 29 feet above the deck. Mangrove is dense and strong, resistant to rot from seawater. The A-frame design provides stability, allowing the mast to withstand the tremendous forces that will be exerted by the sail in high winds. Behind the mast, a small cabin is built from bamboo canes split and woven together, roofed with banana leaves coated in a natural sealant. The cabin is only 14 feet long and 8 feet wide, barely tall enough for a man to sit upright inside. This tiny shelter will be home for 6 men for however long the journey takes. It will protect them from sun and rain, house their supplies and equipment, provide a cramped space where they can sleep in shifts while the raft drifts endlessly westward. The deck is partially covered with split bamboo, laid loose so water can drain through. The raft's design deliberately allows seawater to wash across and through the deck. The balsa logs will absorb some water over time, becoming heavier but never sinking, held afloat by billions of tiny air cells trapped in the wood cellular structure. The raft will ride lower as the journey progresses, but Thor is confident it will remain seaworthy. At the stern, a long steering oar is mounted, carved from mangrove with a blade of fir wood. This oar, along with the adjustable centerboards, will provide what little directional control the raft possesses. The crew will learn that ancient rafts were far more maneuverable than modern scholars believed, capable of adjusting course by perhaps 20 or 30 degrees, enough to aim for specific island groups rather than drifting randomly wherever the current takes them. The mainsail is woven from canvas in the traditional square shape, 15 feet wide and 18 feet high, painted with a fierce face meant to represent Kon-Tiki himself. Eric Hesselberg paints this image, giving the raft its spiritual center, a symbolic connection to the ancient mariners whose journey they hope to replicate. The face stares westward, toward Polynesia, toward the unknown. Thor names the raft Kon-Tiki, after the legendary god king whose story started everything. The name is painted on the sail in bold letters, a declaration of purpose and identity. Supplies are carefully selected and stowed. The expedition carries 275 gallons of drinking water in 56 water cans, supplemented by sealed bamboo tubes that will test the effectiveness of ancient water storage methods. For food, they load 200 coconuts, sweet potatoes, bottled goods, and other fruits and roots that ancient voyagers would have carried. These provisions will be supplemented by modern military rations from the US Army, tinned foods, and survival equipment. Thor justifies the modern supplies by explaining that the expedition's purpose is to prove the raft itself can make the journey, not to recreate every aspect of ancient life. The crew will also catch fish. The Pacific teams with marine life, and the men carry fishing lines, harpoons, and nets. They expect to catch flying fish, tuna, bonito, sharks, and the dolphin fish known as mahi-mahi. Ancient voyagers would have relied heavily on fishing, and the Kon-Tiki crew intends to do the same. Scientific equipment is loaded aboard. Herman's weather instruments will record temperature, humidity, barometric pressure, and wave heights. A sextant and chronometer will allow Eric to calculate their position using celestial navigation. The radio equipment is carefully packed in waterproof containers, along with batteries and the hand-cranked generator that will power it. The radio has the call sign Li2B, and Canute and Torstein plan to maintain regular contact with amateur radio operators throughout the Americas. The crew carries cameras and film to document the journey. Thor knows that visual evidence will be crucial in convincing skeptics. He wants footage of the raft at sea, of marine life surrounding them, of the crew's daily existence. This documentation will form the basis for a book and potentially a film. Personal items are minimal. Each man brings a few changes of clothes, a sleeping bag, books to read during the long days at sea, small mementos from home. They pack playing cards, a guitar, notebooks for journals. The expedition will be equal parts scientific endeavor, survival challenge, and test of human endurance under cramped, isolated conditions. As construction nears completion in early 1947, word of the expedition spreads. Journalists visit the dock in Kal Lau, interviewing Thor and his crew, photographing the strange raft taking shape. The reactions range from admiration to disbelief. Many reporters focus on the dangers, interviewing maritime experts who declare the raft unseaworthy. naval officers examine Kon-Tiki and shake their heads. The logs will become waterlogged and sink, they warn. The rope will rot. The raft will break apart in the first storm. The crew will starve, or die of thirst, or be eaten by sharks. Thor listens to these warnings with polite patience. He has heard them all before. He points out that Spanish chroniclers described South American rafts sailing for weeks on fishing and trading expeditions, that these vessels were more durable and capable than modern people assume. But he knows words cannot convince his critics. Only the journey itself will prove his point or destroy his theory forever. On April 28, 1947, everything is ready. The crew gathers aboard Kon-Tiki for the last time in port. They have made final checks of equipment, secured supplies, said goodbyes to friends and family who have traveled to Peru to see them off. The Peruvian Navy has offered to tow the raft 50 miles out to sea, beyond the coastal traffic and shipping lanes, into the grip of the Humboldt Current that will carry them westward. The morning is clear, the ocean calm. A Peruvian naval tug, the Guardian Rios, takes Kon-Tiki in tow. Slowly, the raft is pulled away from Calaro's docks, past stone breakwaters, into open water. People line the shore, waving. Some cheer. Others watch in somber silence, certain they are witnessing 6 men sailing to their deaths. Thor stands on the raft's deck, feeling the gentle swell beneath him, watching Peru's mountains recede into haze. He thinks about all the moments that have led to this, his childhood fascination with exploration, his time on Fatu Hiva, the rejection of his theory by academics, the struggles to fund this expedition. Everything has built toward this moment, this leap into the unknown aboard a raft that critics call a suicide vessel. Beside him, Herman checks weather instruments one last time. Eric studies charts, calculating their starting position. Knut and Torstein test the radio, making contact with operators on shore. Bengt inventory supplies, ensuring everything is properly secured. Eric tunes his guitar, strumming a few chords that drift across the water. For 50 miles, the tug pulls them westward. The crew grows accustomed to the raft's motion, the way it rises and falls with the swells, the constant movement that will be their reality for the next 3 to 4 months. The raft rides high in the water, the balsa logs buoyant and light, the deck mostly dry except where waves occasionally wash across. In the late afternoon, far from shore, the tug's captain signals that they have reached the release point. This is the moment of truth. The tow rope is cast off. Guardian Rio sounds its horn in salute, then turns back toward Peru. Kon-Tiki is alone on the Pacific, drifting free. For a moment, silence. The 6 men stand on deck, feeling the raft settle into the current's embrace. The sail hangs limp in the calm air. The ocean stretches in every direction, blue and vast and indifferent. They are committed now. There is no turning back. The coast of South America lies 50 miles to the east. The nearest islands of Polynesia lie more than 4,000 miles to the west. Between them and their goal stretches the largest ocean on Earth, a watery wilderness that has swallowed countless ships and sailors. Thor breaks the silence. He raises a mug of water, proposes a toast to Kon-Tiki, to the ancient mariners who may have made this journey before them, to the success of their expedition. The others raise their mugs. They drink. And then they get to work. The first task is raising the sail. The wind is light but steady from the southeast, exactly as Thor predicted. The great square sail is hoisted up the mangrove mast, the ropes creaking, the canvas catching wind and filling. The raft begins to move. It is a strange sensation, so different from a boat. There is no engine's vibration, no hull cutting through water. The raft simply yields to the forces around it, floating on the surface, pushed by wind and pulled by current, moving at perhaps 1 or 2 knots. Eric takes the steering oar, feeling how the raft responds. It is less responsive than a boat, more like guiding than steering. Small adjustments to the centerboards, subtle shifts in the sail's angle, gentle pressure on the long oar. The raft cannot sail against the wind, cannot tack upwind like a yacht, but it can adjust its course enough to avoid obstacles, to aim for specific destinations. As the sun sets on their first day at sea, the crew gathers on deck. The sky turns gold, then orange, then purple. Stars emerge, brilliant and uncountable in the darkness far from any artificial light. The Southern Cross hangs low on the horizon, the same constellation that guided ancient Polynesian navigators across these waters. The men establish a watch schedule. 2 will be on deck at all times, monitoring the raft, adjusting the steering, watching for ships or hazards. The others will sleep in the cramped bamboo cabin or on deck under the stars. There is no room for everyone inside the cabin simultaneously, so they sleep in shifts, trading stories and keeping watch through the long Pacific nights. That first night, none of them sleep much. The ocean is alive with sounds, the creak of rope, the slap of small waves against balsa logs, the rustle of the sail, strange splashes and distant calls of sea creatures. Phosphorescence glows in the water, ignited by the raft's passage, leaving trails of green light in their wake. The men lean over the edge, trailing their hands through water that sparkles at their touch, marveling at the beauty of bioluminescent plankton. Morning brings their first full day at sea. The sun rises astern, painting the sky red and gold. The men cook breakfast on a small primus stove sheltered in a corner of the deck, brewing coffee and warming tinned rations. The raft rides the swell smoothly, its flexible construction allowing it to bend and twist with the waves in ways that would shatter a rigid vessel. Herman begins his scientific observations, recording wind speed and direction, water temperature, cloud formations, the raft's estimated position. Eric takes sextant readings when the sun reaches its zenith, calculating their latitude. The radio crackles to life as Canute makes contact with an amateur operator in Peru, confirming they are safely underway. The question everyone asks themselves but does not voice: will the raft hold together? Will the ropes stay tight? Will the balsa logs remain buoyant? They have no precedent for this journey, no modern experience with balsa rafts at sea. The first week will tell them whether they are aboard a seaworthy vessel or a floating coffin. The days settle into rhythm. The sun marks time, rising and setting with equatorial swiftness. The trade winds blow steadily from the southeast, pushing them westward. The Humboldt Current, that great river of cold water flowing north along South America's coast before turning west across the Pacific, carries them in its grip. They are not merely floating, they are being transported by forces far greater than themselves, the same forces that have shaped Pacific navigation for thousands of years. The crew begins to understand the raft's personality. It does not fight the ocean but yields to it, riding over waves rather than crashing through them. When a large swell approaches, the raft lifts smoothly, rising and falling like a bird on wind. Water washes across the deck constantly, but the open construction allows it to drain immediately. Their feet are always wet, the bamboo deck always damp, but they learn to accept this as normal. Marine life discovers them quickly. Flying fish, startled by the raft's shadow, burst from the water and glide for hundreds of feet before splashing down. At night, these fish sometimes land on deck, drawn to the crew's lantern light, providing fresh food for breakfast. Dolphins appear, racing alongside the raft, leaping and playing in the bow wave. Their intelligence is obvious in their eyes, their curiosity about these strange floating men. Thor observes everything, taking notes for the book he plans to write. He describes the color of the water, deep blue during the day, black at night. He records the temperature of the air, warm during daylight, surprisingly cool after sunset. He sketches the raft's performance, noting that it holds together perfectly, that the rope shows no signs of weakening, that the balsa logs ride as high as when they started. At night, the stars provide navigation and wonder. Eric teaches the others to identify constellations, to use the stars for estimating direction and latitude. Thor points out that ancient navigators would have known these stars intimately, would have memorized the night sky as modern people memorize street maps. The expedition is proving not only that the journey was possible, but that ancient peoples possessed the knowledge and skills to attempt it deliberately rather than by accident. The crew develops camaraderie born of shared isolation. They tell stories of their lives before the expedition, their experiences during the war, their dreams for the future. Herman explains the principles of wave mechanics, describing how energy moves through water without the water itself traveling far. Knut and Thorstein share tales of resistance work, of close calls with German patrols, of the satisfaction of contributing to Allied victory. Bengt discusses anthropological theories, the patterns of human migration that have populated every habitable land on Earth. Eric plays his guitar, simple melodies that drift across the water. The music provides comfort, a human sound in the vast inhuman emptiness of the ocean. Sometimes they sing Norwegian folk songs, sea shanties, anything that reminds them of home and humanity. Food becomes a focus of daily life. Bengt rations the supplies carefully, ensuring they will have enough to reach Polynesia even if the journey takes longer than expected. Fresh fish supplements their diet. They catch yellowfin tuna, hauling the fighting fish aboard with whoops of triumph. The tuna is butchered on deck, its flesh dark red and rich, grilled over the primus stove or eaten raw in the Japanese style. Water is more precious than food. They drink sparingly from their stored supply, knowing that if they run out, there is no refilling their cans. Rain occasionally provides fresh water, collected in canvas tarps and funneled into containers. These tropical showers are brief but intense, and the crew learns to move quickly when clouds gather, positioning every available container to catch the life-giving rain. The raft's performance exceeds every expectation. The balsa logs do absorb water, becoming slightly heavier, but they remain buoyant. The rope stays tight, the knots hold. The bamboo cabin keeps most rain out, though everything inside acquires a permanent dampness that encourages mold on books and rust on metal tools. The crew learns to store important items in waterproof containers, to dry their sleeping bags in the sun whenever possible, to accept that complete dryness is a luxury of land-dwelling life. By the end of the first week, they have traveled approximately 100 miles westward. The coast of South America is far beyond the horizon, invisible and irrelevant. They are committed to the journey now, fully at the mercy of wind and current. If the raft were to break apart, they would have no choice but to take to their small rubber life raft and hope for rescue by a passing ship. But the raft shows no signs of weakness. It flexes with the waves, creaks and groans in the night, but holds together with a resilience that vindicates Thor's faith in ancient craftsmanship. As the second week begins, the crew has fully adapted to life at sea. Their initial nervousness has transformed into confidence. They have learned the raft's limits and capabilities. They know how to adjust the sail for maximum speed, how to use the centerboards to alter course slightly, how to predict the weather from cloud formations and wind shifts. They are no longer landlubbers playing at ancient mariners, they are becoming seamen in truth, learning skills that their ancestors knew but that have been lost in the modern age of powered vessels and GPS navigation. Thor watches the sun sink into the Western Ocean and feels vindication growing in his heart. They have proven the first part of his theory, a balsa raft can survive at sea. Now they must prove the second part, that it can reach Polynesia, that the journey is not merely possible but practical, that ancient South Americans could have done exactly what Kon-Tiki is doing now. The ocean stretches ahead, vast and blue and full of challenge. But Thor Heyerdahl and his crew are no longer afraid. They are adventurers, explorers, scientists, and dreamers, riding the same winds and currents that may have carried their predecessors across this ocean 1,500 years ago. The journey has truly begun. The third week brings new routines and deeper understanding of their floating world. The crew has discovered that life aboard Kon-Tiki operates on two time scales simultaneously. There is the immediate present, measured in watch shifts and meals, in the position of the sun and stars, in the endless tasks of maintaining equipment and catching food. And there is the larger time scale of the journey itself, measured in degrees of longitude crossed, in the slow accumulation of miles drifting westward, in the patient knowledge that Polynesia lies somewhere ahead, beyond a horizon that never seems to change. The raft drifts at varying speeds depending on wind and current. On good days, they might cover 60 or even 70 miles. On calm days, the distance shrinks to 30 or 40 miles. Herman records every detail, calculating their average speed at approximately 1.5 knots, roughly the pace of a slow walk. At this rate, reaching the Tuamotu archipelago, the first island group they might encounter, will require 3 to 4 months of continuous drifting. The isolation is profound yet strangely peaceful. They see no ships, no planes, no evidence of human civilization beyond their raft. They are alone on an ocean that covers a third of Earth's surface, floating in a wilderness as vast and empty as any desert or ice cap. The crew expected loneliness, but what they feel instead is a sense of connection, both to each other and to the ancient voyagers they are honoring through this journey. The raft itself seems almost alive. At night, when waves slap against the balsa logs, it sounds like breathing. The ropes creak in rhythms that suggest a heartbeat. The sail fills and empties with wind like lungs drawing breath. The men find themselves speaking to the raft, patting its logs, thanking it for staying together through another day. They are no longer passengers on an inanimate vessel, they are crew aboard a living companion that shares their journey and their fate. Marine encounters become daily events, sometimes thrilling, occasionally terrifying, always fascinating. One morning, Eric spots a dark shape in the water alongside the raft. At first, he thinks it is a log, perhaps debris from some distant shipwreck. But the shape moves, rising and falling with purpose rather than drifting passively. As it approaches, the crew realizes they are looking at a whale shark, the largest fish in the ocean, its massive body perhaps 30 feet long, its broad mouth capable of swallowing a man whole. The whale shark circles the raft, its spotted skin visible just beneath the surface. The creature shows no aggression, only curiosity. It swims so close that the men can lean over and touch its rough skin, feeling the living warmth of an animal that has existed largely unchanged for millions of years. Thor marvels at the encounter, recognizing that ancient mariners would have experienced these same meetings, would have felt the same mixture of fear and wonder at sharing the ocean with such giants. Smaller sharks are constant companions. They gather beneath the raft, attracted by the shade it provides and by the schools of small fish that hide among the balsa logs. Some are harmless reef sharks, their movements graceful and economical. Others are more dangerous, blue sharks with slender bodies and cold eyes, oceanic whitetips with scarred fins and aggressive temperaments. The crew learns to respect these predators, never trailing hands or feet carelessly over the side, always aware that the raft's open construction means sharks can swim directly beneath and even partially through the deck. One afternoon, a shark takes bait meant for tuna. The fishing line screams as the shark runs, diving deep. The crew hauls it up, a 6-foot blue shark that thrashes violently on deck, its teeth snapping at anything within reach. They need fresh meat, so they club the shark, then butcher it carefully. The meat is dense and slightly ammonia-scented but edible when cooked thoroughly. They discover that shark liver, rich in oil, can be used to supplement their cooking fuel, a trick that ancient voyagers surely knew. Flying fish provide regular entertainment and sustenance. These remarkable creatures, pursued by predators below, launch themselves from the water and glide for astonishing distances on wing-like pectoral fins. At night, attracted by the crew's lantern, flying fish land on the raft with wet thuds, sometimes hitting the sail or bouncing off the cabin roof before flopping onto the deck. The men wake to find a dozen or more fish waiting to be collected for breakfast. They are delicious grilled or fried, their flesh white and delicate, a gift from the ocean that requires no effort to catch. Dolphins visit frequently, often in large pods that play around the raft for hours. These are spotted dolphins, spinner dolphins, common dolphins, species that range across the Pacific following schools of fish and squid. The crew never tires of watching them. The dolphins' intelligence is obvious in their behavior, the way they seem to study the men, leaping high as if showing off, racing alongside the raft as if challenging it to go faster. Sometimes at night, the crew hears dolphins breathing nearby, their exhalations loud in the darkness, reminding them they are not truly alone on this vast ocean. One evening, as the sun sets in gold and crimson splendor, a pod of pilot whales approaches. These are large cetaceans, each perhaps 20 feet long, traveling in a tight family group. They surface around the raft, their breathing synchronized, their bodies close enough to touch. The lead female rises beside the steering oar, her eye visible above water, looking directly at Thor. For a long moment, they regard each other, man and whale, two forms of intelligence meeting in the middle of nowhere. Then the whales dive, their flukes breaking the surface, and disappear into the depths. Weather patterns establish themselves. The southeast trade winds blow with remarkable consistency, rarely shifting direction, varying only in strength. Most days bring winds of 10 to 15 knots, perfect for pushing the raft westward without straining the sail or stressing the mast. Occasionally, the wind drops completely, leaving the raft wallowing in calm seas, moving only with the current. These becalmed days test patience, but they also provide opportunity for repairs, for washing clothes in seawater, for fishing and relaxing in the tropical sun. Clouds build in late afternoon, towering cumulus formations that march across the sky like a fleet of aerial mountains. These clouds sometimes bring rain, brief tropical showers that drench the raft and refill their water containers. The crew learns to predict rain by watching the clouds, by feeling changes in humidity, by noting shifts in wind direction. When rain comes, they strip to their shorts and stand on deck, letting fresh water wash away the accumulated salt that crusts their skin and hair. Occasionally, the weather turns violent. Thunderstorms develop with startling speed, transforming a peaceful afternoon into a tempest of wind and lightning. The crew lowers the sail and secures everything on deck, then rides out the storm, trusting the raft to survive forces that would challenge vessels far larger and more sophisticated. Lightning cracks across black clouds, illuminating the ocean in flickering blue-white pulses. Thunder rolls across the water, a sound so deep and primal that it seems to come from the ocean itself rather than the sky. During these storms, waves grow steep and chaotic. The raft rides them remarkably well, its flexible construction allowing it to bend and twist, conforming to the shape of each wave rather than resisting. Water pours across the deck, sometimes knee-deep, but drains quickly through the gaps between bamboo slats. Inside the cabin, the crew huddles in damp darkness, listening to the storm's fury, trusting in balsa and hemp and ancient wisdom. In the storm's aftermath, the ocean seems reborn. The air smells fresh and clean, washed free of salt and dust. The water gleams a deeper blue, cleared of suspended particles. Fish rise to feed on plankton stirred up by the turbulence. The sun breaks through thinning clouds, and rainbows arch across the sky, their colors vivid against dark storm remnants still retreating eastward. The radio becomes their link to civilization, their proof that the world beyond the raft still exists. Canute and Torstein maintain contact with amateur radio operators throughout the Americas, reporting their position and condition, receiving messages of encouragement and news from home. The radio operators form an informal network, passing information from Kon-Tiki to newspapers and radio stations, keeping the public informed of the expedition's progress. The radio equipment performs better than expected despite constant exposure to salt spray and humidity. Canute nurses the batteries carefully, running the hand-cranked generator to recharge them, rationing transmission time to conserve power. The antenna wire stretches from the top of the mast to the cabin, swaying with the raft's motion, somehow maintaining its connection to distant receivers. Messages arrive with news of the outside world. The crew learns that India has achieved independence, that tensions are rising between the United States and Soviet Union, that life continues in its complex patterns of conflict and cooperation while they drift across timeless waters. These news reports feel distant and unreal, as if describing events on another planet rather than the world they left only weeks ago. One evening, Canute makes contact with a Norwegian operator, someone who knows Thor's family, who has messages from home. Wives and children are well. Parents send love and prayers. Friends celebrate the expedition's success so far. Thor listens to Canute relaying these messages, feeling the tug of connection across thousands of miles, grateful for technology that ancient mariners never possessed but recognizing that their isolation is fundamentally the same, that they are just as alone despite the radio's crackling voice. The crew's personalities emerge more distinctly as weeks pass. Herman reveals himself as meticulous and patient, endlessly fascinated by data, filling notebooks with observations that will later inform scientific papers about Pacific currents and weather patterns. He constructs ingenious devices for measuring wave heights and drift rates, approaching the journey as a floating laboratory rather than merely an adventure. Eric proves to be the raft's soul, his guitar and artwork providing beauty in surroundings that could easily become monotonous. He sketches constantly, capturing the play of light on water, the shapes of clouds, portraits of his companions as they work or rest. His painting of Kon-Tiki's face on the sail becomes an icon, staring westward with determination that mirrors the crew's own resolve. Canute and Thorstein form a natural partnership, their shared wartime experiences creating bonds deeper than friendship. They work the radio together, troubleshoot equipment problems, stand watches side by side. Their quiet competence provides stability, a sense that no matter what happens, these two will find a solution, will keep the raft connected and functioning. Beck becomes the raft's philosopher, the crew member most interested in the anthropological implications of their journey. He reads constantly, everything from Polynesian myths to accounts of ancient navigators, seeking patterns and connections that might support or challenge Thor's theories. His Spanish fluency proves invaluable in the early stages, and now his thoughtfulness provides intellectual depth to their daily discussions. Thor himself is the expedition's driving force, though he wears leadership lightly. He does not command so much as inspire, his enthusiasm for the journey infectious, his confidence in the raft's capabilities unwavering even when others express doubts. He is first on deck when something interesting happens, last asleep when work needs doing, always ready with an encouraging word or a new observation about their surroundings. The 6 men gel into a unit stronger than the sum of its parts. They develop private jokes, shared references, a communication style that requires few words. They know each other's moods, when someone needs solitude and when companionship provides comfort. Arguments are rare and quickly resolved, everyone understanding that survival depends on cooperation, that personal conflicts are luxuries they cannot afford. Food preparation becomes a communal activity, a daily ritual that marks time's passage. Bengt allocates rations, but everyone participates in cooking and cleaning. They experiment with their supplies, discovering that military rations can be made more palatable with fish or that coconut milk improves almost any dish. They catch mahi-mahi, the dolphin fish that glows green and gold when first pulled from the water, its flesh transforming to white when cooked, delicious and abundant. Water discipline remains strict. Each man receives a daily ration, enough to drink but not enough to waste. They learn to rinse dishes in seawater, to clean themselves with saltwater baths followed by minimal freshwater rinses. The bamboo containers they brought from Peru prove effective at storing water, challenging modern assumptions that ancient voyagers must have struggled with dehydration. Hygiene becomes creative. Shaving is abandoned after the first week, everyone growing beards that become crusted with salt and bleached by sun. Hair grows long and wild. Clothes are reduced to shorts and sometimes shirts during the hottest parts of the day. They wash in the ocean, scrubbing with salt water that leaves them clean but never quite feeling fresh. Teeth are brushed with seawater, a practice that works surprisingly well. Sanitation is managed with dignity despite the raft's small size and open construction. They rig a simple toilet seat over the stern, suspended above the water, providing privacy through an unspoken agreement to ignore whoever is using it. Waste drops directly into the ocean, where it is immediately carried away by current and wave action. It is crude but functional, another reminder that ancient mariners faced and solved the same basic human needs. As the fourth week begins, Thor makes calculations based on Herman's data and Eric's navigation. They have traveled approximately 1,000 miles from Peru, averaging about 35 to 40 miles per day. At this rate, they should sight the Tuamotu archipelago in 60 to 70 more days, assuming the current and wind remain favorable. It is a long time to spend on a raft, but the crew's morale remains high. They have proven the raft can survive. Now they must prove they can reach their destination. The ocean reveals its abundance. Flying fish continue to land on deck nightly. They catch bonito, small tuna that fight hard on light tackle. One afternoon, they hook something massive that strips line from the reel in unstoppable runs. After an hour of battle, the line breaks, leaving them exhausted and awed by whatever monster roams beneath them. Perhaps a marlin or large tuna, perhaps something more exotic. The ocean keeps its secrets. Squid visit at night, drawn by the lantern light. These are small squid, the length of a forearm, with large eyes and tentacles equipped with suckers. The crew catches them with dip nets, marveling at their ability to change color, flashing from white to red to purple in seconds. Squid grilled over the primer stove tastes like expensive seafood, chewy but flavorful, a delicacy that ancient voyagers surely prized. One morning, Eric spots land birds, small shore species that should not be this far from any coast. The birds circle the raft, exhausted, then land to rest on the cabin roof and mast. Thor is initially excited, thinking they might be near undiscovered islands. But Herman calculates that they are still 2,000 miles from the nearest known land. These birds must be migrating, or perhaps lost, blown far out to sea by storms. The crew offers them water and crumbs of food, small acts of mercy for fellow travelers. The birds rest for several hours, then fly off westward, disappearing into blue distance. Their visit raises interesting questions. If birds can be this far from land, might ancient voyagers have followed bird migrations, using them as guides toward unknown islands? Polynesian navigators were known to read signs from nature, interpreting bird behavior, cloud formations, wave patterns, the color of water. Perhaps Kon-Tiki is sailing a route marked not on any chart but written in the behavior of creatures that know the ocean better than any human. Celestial navigation becomes a nightly ritual. Eric takes sextant readings of stars and planets, calculating their latitude with remarkable precision. Longitude is more difficult, requiring accurate time measurements, but the crew's watches, provided by Swiss manufacturer Eterna, keep time reliably despite the salt and humidity. Eric marks their position on charts, showing a wavy line creeping westward across the Pacific, proof of their progress toward Polynesia. The stars at this latitude are spectacular, unspoiled by artificial light, brilliant enough to cast shadows on the deck. The Milky Way stretches overhead like a river of light, so dense with stars that its component points of light blend together. The crew identifies constellations, both northern and southern, lying at the boundary between two hemispheres of sky. Thor points out that ancient navigators knew these stars as intimately as the crew knows the faces of loved ones. They had memorized the rising and setting points of major stars, used them to maintain course even when clouds obscured the horizon. They understood that different stars would be visible at different latitudes, allowing them to judge their north-south position. They recognized that some stars never set at certain latitudes, circling the celestial pole in eternal loops. This knowledge, accumulated over generations, was the GPS of the ancient world, less precise but entirely reliable for those who understood its language. One night, Thor proposes a test. He asks Eric to hide the charts and navigate by stars alone, as ancient mariners would have done. Eric accepts the challenge. For 3 nights, he uses only celestial observations to maintain their westward course, avoiding any reference to modern instruments beyond the sextant. On the 4th morning, he compares his estimated position with calculations based on the chronometer. The difference is less than 20 miles, proof that ancient navigation techniques, when practiced with skill, could guide voyagers across open ocean with acceptable accuracy. The experiment builds confidence in Thor's theory. Ancient South Americans would not have possessed sextants or chronometers, but they would have understood the sky, would have developed methods for judging position and direction using stars, sun, moon, and the natural signs that reveal themselves to careful observers. The journey Kon-Tiki is making was not only possible but achievable for peoples with the knowledge and courage to attempt it. As the 5th week unfolds, the crew settles into acceptance of their floating existence. The raft is no longer a strange environment but home, the only home that matters. The bamboo cabin, initially cramped and uncomfortable, becomes cozy and familiar. Each man has his sleeping spot, his corner for personal items, his routine for washing and dressing. The deck, though always damp and littered with fish scales and rope coils, is their living room, dining room, and workplace. They have forgotten the feel of solid ground beneath their feet. The raft's constant motion, once unsettling, is now normal. When they imagine walking on shore, they anticipate feeling dizzy from the unnatural stillness. They have become creatures of the ocean, adapted to endless horizons and rolling swells, to the taste of salt on their lips and the cry of seabirds overhead. The philosophical discussions grow deeper as the journey progresses. They talk about human migration, about what drives people to leave known lands and venture into unknown territories. They debate whether ancient voyages were planned expeditions or accidental discoveries, whether mariners set out deliberately to find new islands or whether survivors of fishing trips blown off course stumbled onto distant shores and sparked settlement. Bengt argues that both mechanisms probably occurred. Some voyages were intentional, driven by overpopulation or political conflict or simply the human urge to explore. Others were accidental, desperate survivors on damaged vessels carried by storms to unexpected landfalls. Both types of voyage could have contributed to Polynesian settlement patterns, creating a complex picture that resists simple explanations. Thor maintains that his theory allows for both mechanisms. Whether Kon-Tiki the legendary figure led a planned exodus from South America or whether his people stumbled onto Polynesian islands by accident matters less than proving that South Americans could have reached Polynesia using available technology. The journey Kon-Tiki the raft is making demonstrates feasibility, which is the foundation for any historical theory. Herman contributes data showing that currents and winds would have carried any vessel departing from South America's coast in the direction of Polynesia. The Humboldt Current flows northward along Chile and Peru, then curves westward across the Pacific, exactly the route Kon-Tiki is following. Ancient mariners did not need to understand the physics of ocean circulation, they only needed to observe that objects placed in the water near shore floated westward, that the wind blew toward the setting sun, that the ocean itself seemed to flow in that direction. Eric adds that South American rafts, according to Spanish chroniclers, were used for long-distance trading expeditions, sometimes traveling for weeks along the coast. A raft blown off course during such a voyage could easily find itself caught in the westward-flowing current, carried beyond sight of land, forced to continue westward or perish. The crew that made landfall on some distant Polynesian island would have brought with them the plants they carried for trade, the techniques they knew for building and navigation, the stories that would transform into legends of gods arriving from the east. The discussions help pass time during the long days when nothing changes, when horizon looks identical to horizon, when the raft seems motionless despite Herman's instruments recording steady westward progress. Intellectual engagement keeps their minds active, prevents the numbing boredom that could lead to carelessness or depression. They also talk about life after the expedition. What will they do when they reach Polynesia? How will the world receive their accomplishment? Will Thor's theory gain acceptance, or will critics dismiss the voyage as a publicity stunt that proves nothing about ancient migrations? The men understand that they are participating in something historic, that their journey will be studied and debated, that their names will be linked forever to this raft and this ocean. But mostly they focus on the immediate present, on maintaining the raft, on catching enough food and conserving enough water to survive. The future is abstract, Polynesia just a concept on a chart. The present is real, concrete, demanding attention. They live in the now because the now is all they truly have. By the 6th week, subtle changes emerge. The balsa logs have absorbed considerable water, riding lower than at journey's start. The raft is heavier, more sluggish in the waves. But it remains seaworthy, the logs still providing enough buoyancy to keep the deck mostly above water. Thor's faith in balsa has been justified. The wood's cellular structure, filled with air pockets, cannot become fully saturated. No matter how much water the outer layers absorb, the inner core remains buoyant, ensuring the raft will float even if it becomes waterlogged. The rope, subjected to constant strain and salt water exposure, has tightened rather than loosening. The hemp fibers have swollen with moisture, creating bonds even stronger than when dry. The lashings show no signs of fraying or weakening. Ancient rope makers understood their materials intimately, knew that hemp treated properly would strengthen when wet, would last months or even years in marine conditions. The bamboo cabin has weathered well, though the banana leaf thatch shows wear from sun and salt. A few panels have been replaced using spare materials, but the structure remains sound. Inside, despite the constant dampness, the crew has created a surprisingly comfortable space. Sleeping bags hang from lines strung across the ceiling to air out during the day. Books, miraculously, have survived the humidity, though pages are yellowed and wavy. The radio equipment sits in its waterproof cases, reliable as always, maintaining their thread of connection to the outside world. The sail, that great square of canvas painted with Kon-Tiki's face, has become the expedition's emblem. Photos taken by the crew show it filled with wind, the painted features seeming to show determination and perhaps satisfaction. The sail has torn in a few places during storms, and Eric has sewn patches using spare canvas and sailmaker's needles. These repairs hold perfectly, the patches blending into the original fabric like scars on well-healed skin. One afternoon in the 7th week, something extraordinary happens. The crew spots a ship, the first vessel they have seen since Guardian Rios towed them from Callao almost 50 days earlier. It appears as a dark shape on the northern horizon, growing slowly larger. Through binoculars, they identify it as a freighter, probably traveling between Panama and New Zealand or Australia. The crew debates signaling the ship. Part of them wants contact, wants to send messages home, wants confirmation that the rest of the world still exists. But another part hesitates. Signaling the ship might prompt rescue efforts, might end their journey prematurely if the captain believes they are in distress. After discussion, they decide to signal only if the ship approaches closely. Otherwise, they will let it pass, maintaining their independence, proving they can complete the voyage without assistance. The freighter changes course slightly, heading in their direction. The crew raises flags, waves, makes themselves visible. The ship approaches within a mile, close enough that they can see figures on the bridge, sailors lining the rail to stare at the incredible sight of a primitive raft floating in the middle of the Pacific. The freighter sounds its horn, 3 long blasts that echo across the water. Thor and his crew wave enthusiastically, shouting greetings that cannot possibly be heard across the distance. The captain must be radioing their position and condition to port authorities. This contact will reassure the Norwegian government and the expedition's families that everyone is safe and proceeding westward. After circling the raft once, the freighter resumes its course, gradually disappearing over the western horizon. The crew watches it go with mixed feelings, glad for the contact but relieved not to have their journey interrupted. That night, multiple radio operators contact Canute with news that reports of Kon-Tiki's sighting have reached newspapers worldwide. The expedition is front-page news. People are fascinated by the audacity of the voyage, by 6 men deliberately placing themselves at the ocean's mercy aboard a prehistoric vessel. Thor is thrilled. Public interest will help ensure that their findings receive attention, that his theories are given fair consideration regardless of academic prejudices. The encounter with the freighter marks a psychological turning point. For nearly 2 months, the crew has existed in isolation so complete they could almost believe they are alone on Earth. Seeing the ship reminds them that life continues elsewhere, that their journey, however removed from civilization, is still part of the modern world. They are not lost explorers from a forgotten age but contemporary men conducting a scientific experiment that happens to involve crossing an ocean on a raft. As the 8th week begins, Herman announces that they have crossed the halfway point. They are now closer to Polynesia than to Peru. This milestone lifts spirits even higher. They have drifted more than 2,000 miles, proving beyond doubt that the raft can survive extended voyaging. The remaining distance seems manageable, a matter of patience rather than possibility. The ocean continues its lessons. They observe how swells organize themselves into patterns, how waves created by distant storms can travel thousands of miles, how the ocean's surface contains information about weather systems far beyond the horizon. Ancient navigators would have read these signs instinctively, using wave patterns to judge the direction and distance of land, to predict approaching storms, to understand the ocean's moods. Birds become more common as they drift westward, suggesting they are entering regions closer to islands. These are still ocean-going species, birds that spend most of their lives at sea, but their increasing numbers hint that land lies somewhere ahead. The crew feels encouragement in these sightings, taking them as omens of eventual landfall. The parrot they brought from Peru, a bird named Lorita, does not survive the journey. Despite the crew's efforts to care for her, providing food and water and shelter from spray, the constant dampness and salt air prove too much. She dies one morning in the 8th week, and they bury her at sea with genuine sadness. Lorita had been a mascot, a touch of color and life that represented the forests they left behind. Her loss reminds them that they are pushing the limits of what living creatures can endure in this environment. But the crew themselves remains healthy. Their diet of fresh fish supplemented by fruit, coconuts, and military rations provides adequate nutrition. They suffer minor ailments, small cuts that heal slowly in the constant moisture, occasional digestive upsets from too much fish, sunburns despite their tanned skin. But no one falls seriously ill. The physical labor of maintaining the raft keeps them fit. The simple life keeps them mentally sharp. As the 9th week passes, they reflect on what they have accomplished. They have proven that balsa rafts are seaworthy, that they can survive storms and swells that would challenge modern boats. They have demonstrated that ancient navigation techniques work, that celestial observation combined with careful attention to natural signs can guide voyagers across open ocean. They have shown that the Pacific is not an impassable barrier but a highway, difficult and dangerous but navigable for those with courage and knowledge. But they have not yet completed the journey. Until they reach land, until they can stand on a Polynesian island and say definitively that they crossed from Peru using only ancient methods and technologies, the proof remains incomplete. Critics could argue they were lucky, that they succeeded where ancient mariners would have failed, that modern materials or knowledge made the difference. Thor knows that nothing short of actual landfall will satisfy his critics. And even then, some will argue that one successful voyage does not prove ancient voyages occurred. But it will prove possibility, which is the foundation for further research, for open-minded consideration of evidence, for moving beyond the knee-jerk dismissal that has greeted his theories. The 10th week brings a significant weather event. A major storm system approaches from the southeast, building for days before striking. The crew monitors its approach through changes in wind and wave patterns, through the appearance of high cirrus clouds streaming ahead of the storm like outriders heralding an approaching army. When the storm hits, it is more powerful than anything they have experienced. Winds gust to perhaps 40 or 50 knots, strong enough to force them to lower the sail completely, relying on the bare mast and cabin to catch enough wind to maintain steerage. Waves build to 20 feet or higher, steep mountains of water that march toward the raft with terrible regularity. The crew secures everything on deck, lashing down equipment, stowing loose items in the cabin. They prepare psychologically for what may be the journey's greatest test. If the raft is going to break apart, this storm could be the trigger. The waves, the wind, the sheer violence of the ocean in full fury might exceed what balsa and hemp can endure. The storm lasts throughout the night and into the following day. The crew takes turns on watch, though there is little they can do beyond monitoring the steering oar and ensuring nothing breaks free. They huddle in the cabin when not on duty, listening to the howl of wind, the crash of waves against the logs, the creaking protests of rope and wood stressed beyond design limits. Water pours across the deck continuously. The raft disappears beneath foam and spray, emerging from each wave only to be engulfed by the next. Inside the cabin, everything becomes soaked despite their efforts to seal openings. The sleeping bags are drenched, the food stores waterlogged, personal items floating in several inches of water sloshing across the floor. Yet the raft holds together. The flexible construction that worried engineers back in Peru proves to be its greatest strength. The raft does not fight the waves but yields to them, twisting and bending, riding up and over swells that would swamp a rigid vessel. The logs shift slightly within their lashings, distributing stress across multiple connection points rather than concentrating force in single weak spots. When dawn breaks on the second day, the storm begins to weaken. The wind drops from a scream to a roar to a moan. The waves slowly organize themselves into more regular patterns. By afternoon, the storm has passed, racing northward to trouble other parts of the Pacific. The crew emerges from the cabin into brilliant sunshine. The raft looks battered but intact. Every rope is still tied, every log still in place. The steering oar is intact. The mast stands firm. They have survived, and more than survived, they have triumphed. The storm has tested the raft to its limits and found those limits to be adequate. The cleanup takes hours. They bail water from the cabin, wring out sleeping bags, spread everything on deck to dry in the sun. They inspect every lashing, every connection point, looking for damage. They find minor wear in a few places and make repairs, tightening ropes, replacing sections that show excessive fraying. But overall, the raft has weathered the storm remarkably well. That night, as they gather on deck under stars that seem especially bright after the storm, Thor proposes a toast to Kon-Tiki, to the raft that has carried them safely through every challenge. The men raise mugs of rainwater collected during the storm, clean and fresh and precious. They drink to the ancient craftsmen who understood how to build vessels that could survive the ocean's worst moods. They drink to their own courage and skill. And they drink to the promise of land somewhere ahead, drawing closer with each passing day. The 11th week brings new signs of approaching land. More birds appear, including species that nest on islands rather than living entirely at sea. The color of the water changes subtly, from the deep blue of the open ocean to slightly greener shades that suggest shallower depths or different nutrient concentrations. The crew feels excitement building, a sense that their journey approaches its climax. Herman's calculations show they have traveled approximately 3,500 miles from Peru. The Tuamotu archipelago should lie somewhere ahead, perhaps 500 or 600 miles to the west. At their current rate of drift, they could sight land within 2 weeks, possibly sooner if winds and currents remain favorable. But approaching land brings new dangers. The Tuamotu archipelago is nicknamed the Dangerous Archipelago for good reason. It consists of dozens of low coral atolls, most rising only a few feet above sea level, nearly invisible from any distance. Ships have wrecked on these reefs for centuries, caught by currents that sweep vessels onto coral that tears through wooden hulls like tissue paper. The crew discusses strategies for landfall. They cannot simply beach the raft on any convenient shore. Coral reefs extend far from most atolls, creating barriers of sharp, unforgiving stone that would destroy the raft and possibly kill the crew. They need to find a safe passage, a gap in the reef or a lagoon entrance where they can bring the raft ashore without wrecking it. But the raft cannot be steered precisely. They can influence its direction slightly using the centerboards and steering oar, but they cannot tack against the wind like a sailboat. If they approach an atoll from the wrong angle, if they are swept toward a reef with no safe passage, they will have no choice but to abandon the raft and swim for shore, hoping to survive the coral's teeth. Thor insists they will find a way. They have come too far, survived too much, to fail at the end. The same winds and currents that brought them across the Pacific will guide them to safe landfall. He has faith in the journey's destiny, a conviction that borders on mystical certainty that they will succeed. As the 12th week begins, that faith is tested. Eric calculates that they should be approaching the outer atolls of the Tuamotu archipelago. The crew maintains constant watches, scanning the horizon for any sign of land. Days pass with nothing visible, just endless ocean in every direction. They begin to wonder if Eric's navigation is accurate, if they might drift past the islands completely, missing Polynesia entirely and continuing westward until starvation or thirst ends their voyage in tragedy. Then, on the morning of July 30th, the 93rd day since leaving Peru, a cry comes from the bow. Eric has spotted something on the western horizon, a dark line that might be clouds but that could be land. The crew rushes to the bow, staring westward, willing the shape to resolve into island rather than mirage. As the raft drifts closer over the next hours, the dark line takes definite form. It is land, low and green, an atoll rising barely above sea level but unmistakably solid ground. They have reached Polynesia. Thor's theory has been proven possible. Ancient South Americans could have made this journey, could have reached these islands using nothing more sophisticated than balsa rafts, hemp rope, and navigation by stars. The crew erupts in celebration. They embrace, laugh, shout their triumph to the ocean that brought them here. Months of doubt and danger, of isolation and uncertainty, have led to this moment of vindication. They have drifted 4,000 miles across the largest ocean on Earth, and they have reached their destination. But celebration quickly yields to new concerns. The atoll ahead is Puka Puka, and the current is carrying them toward it at a steady pace. They need to determine if they can land safely or if they must try to steer past this island and continue to another. Eric studies the charts, identifying Puka Puka as one of the northernmost atolls in the Tuamotus. Other islands lie to the south and southwest, including Angator, Roroya, and Tarkume. As they drift closer to Puka Puka, the crew sees that landing is impossible. The atoll is surrounded by continuous reef, with no obvious passage into the lagoon. Waves break white against the coral, marking its deadly presence. To approach closer would invite disaster. They must pass Puka Puka and hope for better options ahead. Using every skill they have learned during the voyage, they adjust the centerboards and steering oar, trying to steer slightly south of the atoll's pull. The raft responds sluggishly but perceptibly. They slip past Puka Puka, close enough to see palm trees and catch the scent of vegetation, but safely away from the reef. They are in Polynesia now, drifting among the islands, but they have not yet found their final landing site. Over the following days, they pass additional atolls, each presenting the same challenge, beautiful from a distance, deadly up close. The current carries them generally westward, threading between islands, sweeping them deeper into the Tuamotus. On August 4th, the 97th day of the voyage, they sight Angator Atoll. This time, they make contact with inhabitants. Islanders in outrigger canoes paddle out to meet them, astonished by the strange raft with its odd sail and foreign crew. Communication is difficult, Norwegian and Polynesian finding little common ground, but gestures and goodwill transcend language. The islanders offer fresh coconuts, bananas, fish prepared in ways the crew has never experienced. The crew gives gifts in return, simple trade items they brought for this purpose. But landing at Angator proves as impossible as landing at Puka Puka. The reef allows no safe passage. The islanders make this clear through gestures and the shaking of heads. The crew must continue drifting, must hope for better fortune at the next island. They part from the Angator Islanders with regret, waving goodbye as the outrigger canoes paddle back to shore. It is frustrating to be so close to land yet unable to reach it, to see solid ground and know it remains inaccessible. But they have no choice. The current pulls them westward, and they must follow where it leads. 3 more days pass. 3 more days of drifting through scattered atolls, each one visible on the horizon, each one marking their progress deeper into Polynesia. The crew is exhausted, ready for the journey to end. They have accomplished their goal of proving ancient South Americans could reach Polynesia. Now they simply want to reach shore, to stand on unmoving ground, to end the constant motion that has defined their lives for more than 3 months. On August 7, 1947, the 101st day since leaving Callao, they sight another atoll. This one, according to Eric's charts, is Roroya. It lies directly in their path, unavoidable. The current is sweeping them toward its reef with steady inevitability. They must either find safe passage or abandon the raft and swim for it. As they drift closer through the morning, the crew examines the atoll carefully. Roroya is typical of the Tuamotus, a ring of coral enclosing a shallow lagoon, palm trees marking where coral rubble has built up enough to support vegetation. The reef extends far from the visible land, breaking the ocean swells into white foam that marks its position. Thor makes a decision. They will attempt to land, to bring the raft to shore intact if possible. They have come this far together, raft and crew, and he does not want to abandon their vessel now. They will steer for what appears to be a gap in the reef, a section where waves seem less violent, where they might be able to slip through into calmer water behind the barrier. The crew prepares for the worst. They pack important equipment in waterproof containers, ready to grab if they must abandon ship. They tie themselves loosely to the raft with long ropes, insurance against being swept away but loose enough to release quickly if the raft breaks apart. They check life vests, ensure everyone knows the plan. As the raft drifts closer to the reef, the roar of breaking waves grows louder, a continuous thunder that drowns out conversation. They can see the reef clearly now, jagged brown coral barely submerged, waves exploding against it in towers of spray. The current pulls them toward this barrier with unstoppable force. This is it. After 101 days and 4,300 miles, their journey reaches its climax. Whatever happens in the next minutes will determine whether they complete their voyage in triumph or disaster. Part 1 of our journey ends here, with Kon-Tiki approaching the reef at Raroya Atoll, 6 men poised between success and catastrophe. But rest assured, there is more to come. The landing, the aftermath, the legacy of this remarkable voyage, all await in Part 2. For now, let your mind rest on this image, a primitive raft, built exactly as the ancients built them, drifting toward a coral reef after crossing 4,300 miles of open ocean. Whatever happens next, Thor Heyerdahl and his crew have already proven the possible. They have shown that ancient peoples could have made this journey, that the Pacific Ocean was not an impassable barrier but a pathway, difficult but navigable. Thank you for joining me on this first part of the Kon-Tiki story. If you enjoyed this journey, please like and subscribe to help others discover these tales of human exploration and courage. Until next time, sleep well, and dream of endless oceans and distant shores. The second half awaits. We return now to Kon-Tiki, approaching the reef at Raroya Atoll on August 7, 1947, after 101 days and 4,300 miles across the Pacific Ocean. 6 men stand on a balsa raft, watching white water explode against coral, knowing that in minutes they will either complete their incredible journey or meet disaster on one of the most dangerous reefs in Polynesia. Let your breathing slow. Let your mind drift back to that moment, suspended between ocean and land, between success and catastrophe, between the ending of one journey and the beginning of something new. The current pulls Kon-Tiki steadily toward the reef. There is no escaping its grip, no way to turn aside. The raft drifts at perhaps 2 or 3 knots, pushed by waves building as they approach shallow water. The crew can hear the reef now, a continuous roar like distant thunder, the sound of the ocean's power meeting immovable stone. Thor stands at the steering oar, trying to aim for what appears to be a lower section of reef, a place where the waves break less violently. Perhaps there is deeper water there, perhaps a gap that will allow them to slip through into the calmer lagoon beyond. But steering is difficult with waves pushing from behind, the raft surfing slightly on the swells, its blunt bow rising and falling. Eric prepares the radio for a final transmission. If they survive the landing, they will want to announce their success immediately. If they do not survive, this transmission will at least record what happened, will let the world know that Kon-Tiki reached Polynesia before meeting its end. Canute stands ready to tap out the message the moment they clear the reef or the moment disaster strikes, whichever comes first. Herman secures his notebooks and instruments, wrapping them in waterproof material. Months of data cannot be lost now. The scientific observations, the careful measurements, the detailed records of weather and currents and the raft's performance are as valuable as the journey itself. This information will support Thor's theories, will provide evidence that scholars cannot dismiss. Becht and Torstein check equipment one final time, ensuring everything is either secured to the raft or packed in containers they can grab quickly. They know that if the raft hits the reef hard, it will likely break apart. Balsa and hemp cannot withstand impact with coral at speed. They may have only seconds to grab essentials before the raft disintegrates beneath them. The reef looms closer. Individual coral heads become visible through clear water, brown and jagged, some breaking the surface, others lurking just beneath. The waves strike the reef and explode upward in geysers of white spray, some reaching 20 or 30 feet high. The sound is deafening, drowning out all other noise, reducing the world to that primal roar of water meeting stone. 50 yards from the reef. 40 yards. 30 yards. The raft accelerates as it nears the barrier, caught by waves building toward their breaking point. The crew grips whatever handholds they can find, bracing for impact, preparing to act if the worst happens. 20 yards. The reef fills their vision, brown coral striped with white foam, utterly unforgiving. They can see fish now, brilliant tropical species darting through shallow water, unconcerned by the drama about to unfold above them. 10 yards. Thor pulls hard on the steering oar, trying to align the raft with what he hopes is the safest path. The raft responds sluggishly, turning slightly, its bow pointing toward a section of reef that appears marginally less murderous than the rest. 5 yards. The crew takes final breaths, preparing for immersion, for the chaos of breaking waves and sharp coral, for whatever comes next. Then impact. Not the violent collision they feared, but a grinding scrape as the raft's bottom touches coral. The forward momentum continues, pushing them up onto the reef, the balsa logs riding over coral heads, grinding across sharp points that tear at the wood. The raft shudders, tilts, slides sideways. A wave catches them from behind, lifting the stern, pushing them farther onto the reef. Another wave follows, then another, each one driving them higher, forcing them across the barrier. The crew hears wood splintering, rope snapping, the terrible sound of their beloved raft being torn apart by forces beyond resistance. But they are moving forward, not being held by the reef. Each wave pushes them a few more feet. The raft is breaking up, logs separating, the carefully lashed structure coming apart, but the wreckage continues forward, carried by wave energy over the coral barrier. Then, suddenly, they are through. The raft, or what remains of it, slides off the inner edge of the reef into calmer water. The lagoon. They have made it into the lagoon. Behind them, the reef continues its thunder, but here the water is relatively calm, protected by the coral barrier from the ocean's full force. The raft is a wreck. 3 of the 9 main logs have broken free, drifting separately. The crossbeams are mostly gone, torn away by the coral. The cabin is destroyed, its bamboo walls crushed, its banana leaf roof scattered across the water. The mast leans at a dangerous angle, held by only a few remaining ropes. But the crew is alive, all 6 men still aboard or clinging to the wreckage, miraculously uninjured except for minor scrapes and bruises. They paddle what remains of Kon-Tiki toward shore, using pieces of broken bamboo as oars. The nearest land is a tiny islet, barely more than a sandbar with a few palm trees, perhaps 100 yards away. The wreckage is slowly sinking as more logs break free, but it remains afloat long enough to carry them into shallow water where they can wade ashore. Thor is the first to step onto land. He staggers slightly, his legs unaccustomed to solid ground after 101 days of constant motion. The ground feels strange, too hard, too still. But it is land, real land, a Polynesian island reached from South America aboard a balsa raft. He has proven his theory possible. Ancient peoples could have made this journey. The others follow, each man experiencing the same disorientation as their bodies adjust to the absence of motion. They collapse on the sand, exhausted, overwhelmed, victorious. They have crossed the Pacific Ocean on a primitive raft. They have survived storms and swells, isolation and uncertainty, doubt and danger. They have achieved something that most of the world said was impossible. For long minutes, no one speaks. They lie on warm sand under palm trees, feeling the sun on their faces, listening to the reef's roar now safely distant, letting the reality of their accomplishment sink in. They have sailed 4,300 miles in 101 days, at an average speed of 1.5 knots, exactly as Thor predicted. They have reached Polynesia. Eventually, Thor rises and walks to where the wreckage of Kon-Tiki has washed onto the beach. The raft that carried them so faithfully is nearly destroyed, but pieces remain. The logs, though splintered and scarred, are still recognizable. The mast lies in the shallows. The sail, torn but intact, floats nearby, Kon-Tiki's painted face staring up at the sky. The crew salvages what they can, dragging equipment and supplies onto the beach. The radio is intact, protected by its waterproof case. Herman's notebook survived, their data safe. Cameras and film, carefully packed, emerge undamaged. The most important elements of the expedition have been preserved. That evening, after setting up a makeshift camp and taking stock of their situation, Canute activates the radio. The transmission is received by operators throughout the Pacific, relayed to news services, broadcast to the world. Kon-Tiki has reached Polynesia. Thor Heyerdahl has proven that ancient South Americans could have settled the Pacific Islands using technology available 1,500 years ago. The crew spend several days alone on the small islet. They have no way to know if anyone lives nearby, if rescue will come, or if they will need to fashion some sort of vessel to reach inhabited land. They have food from salvaged supplies and fish from the lagoon. Fresh water is more challenging, but they manage by collecting rain and finding a few coconuts. On the fourth day, they see outrigger canoes approaching across the lagoon. Inhabitants from the main part of Raroya Atoll have discovered them. The islanders are initially cautious, uncertain about these strange foreign men with their wrecked raft, but Thor's friendly gestures and small gifts break the ice. Soon the Polynesians are smiling, touching the balsa logs with wonder, examining the remains of Kon-Tiki with evident interest. The meeting between the Kon-Tiki crew and the Raroya Islanders represents a convergence of two maritime traditions separated by time and culture. The Polynesians who greet them are descendants of some of history's greatest navigators, peoples who colonized the Pacific using sophisticated double-hulled canoes and intricate knowledge of ocean signs. These islanders live on an atoll barely rising above sea level, surrounded by thousands of miles of ocean, sustaining themselves through fishing, coconut cultivation, and the trading networks that connect scattered island communities. The crew studies the islanders' canoes with professional interest. These are not primitive vessels but finely crafted watercraft, their hulls carved from single logs, their outriggers providing stability, their sails woven from pandanus leaves. The islanders handle these canoes with casual expertise that comes from lifetimes spent on the water, paddling through gaps in the reef that would terrify the Norwegian visitors, reading wave patterns and current flows that reveal themselves only to experienced eyes. Thor tries through gestures and drawings to explain where they came from, pointing east toward the rising sun, sketching maps in the sand showing South America and the long journey westward. The islanders listen with expressions that mingle curiosity and confusion. They point west when asked about their own origins, toward the setting sun, toward islands their ancestors left generations ago in migrations that carried Polynesian culture across millions of square miles of ocean. The language barrier frustrates both groups. The crew knows no Polynesian language, and the islanders speak no European tongues. But certain concepts transcend words. When the islanders demonstrate their fishing techniques, showing how to spear fish in the lagoon or how to fashion hooks from shell, the crew understands through observation. When the Norwegians show photographs from their journey, images of the raft at sea, of flying fish landing on deck, of storms and calms, the islanders exclaim in recognition even without understanding the specific context. Food becomes a medium of cultural exchange. The islanders prepare dishes using methods perfected over centuries, fish wrapped in leaves and baked in earth ovens, coconut cream mixed with taro, breadfruit roasted until its interior becomes soft and sweet. The crew contributes canned goods from their salvaged supplies, introducing the islanders to preserved foods they have never encountered. Both groups sample each other's cuisine with adventurous spirits, discovering that human tastes are more similar than different across cultures. The children of the village prove most willing to bridge the gap. They swarm around the strange visitors, touching their sunburned skin, examining their tattered clothes, laughing at attempts to pronounce Polynesian words. The crew responds with equal warmth, teaching Norwegian phrases, showing magic tricks with rope and coins, giving away small items from their packs as gifts. These interactions, wordless but genuine, create bonds that transcend the limitations of language. At night, the islanders perform traditional dances, movements that tell stories of their history, of gods and heroes, of voyages and discoveries. The crew watches by firelight, mesmerized by the dancers' grace and the drums' rhythms, recognizing that they are witnessing something ancient and precious, cultural traditions maintained for generations despite the isolating ocean that surrounds these remote islands. Thor is struck by the similarities between Polynesian and South American artistic motifs. The carved decorations on the islanders' canoes, the patterns woven into their textiles, the stylized representations of fish and birds all echo designs he has seen in pre-Columbian South American artifacts. These parallels support his theory of contact between the cultures, though he recognizes they could also represent independent development of similar artistic solutions to common themes. The days on Roroya become a period of unexpected peace after months of struggle. The crew has accomplished their goal, proven their point, survived their ordeal. Now they can simply exist, resting in this island paradise, recovering their strength, enjoying the hospitality of people who understand, perhaps better than anyone, what it means to live surrounded by ocean, dependent on its resources, shaped by its rhythms. But the respite cannot last indefinitely. They are stranded on a remote atoll with no means of reaching the outside world beyond their radio. They have limited supplies and cannot impose indefinitely on the islanders' generosity. They need rescue, need to return to civilization, need to begin the work of documenting and sharing what they have learned. Communication is difficult. The crew speaks no Polynesian, and the islanders speak no Norwegian or English. But gestures and goodwill transcend language barriers. The islanders bring food, fresh fish, coconuts, breadfruit, exotic fruits the Norwegians have never tasted. They offer shelter on the main island, where a small village provides a more comfortable base than the crew's temporary camp. The Kon-Tiki crew accepts gratefully. They are taken to the village, where they are welcomed with traditional hospitality. The islanders are fascinated by their story, though they can understand only fragments through elaborate pantomime. These strange men crossed the ocean on a raft? They came from Peru, the distant land to the east. Why would anyone attempt such a journey? Thor tries to explain his theory, that Polynesian ancestors may have come from South America. The islanders listen politely but seem skeptical. Their own legends speak of origins in the west, from islands they call Hawaii, somewhere in the direction of the setting sun. Still, they treat the crew with respect and kindness, providing shelter and food while word spreads to other islands about the remarkable visitors. Days pass in idyllic surroundings. The crew recovers from their ordeal, their strength returning with rest and proper food. They explore Roroya, marveling at the coral formations, the brilliant fish in the lagoon, the simple beauty of life on a Pacific atoll. They are entertained with traditional dances, shown fishing techniques perfected over centuries, taught a few words of the local language. But they also feel the urgency of completing their journey. They have reached Polynesia, but they are still isolated on a remote atoll. They need to reach Tahiti, where they can arrange transport home, where they can preserve the raft's remains and begin analyzing their data, where they can start sharing their findings with the world. Word of their arrival reaches French colonial authorities in Tahiti through the radio network that connects the scattered islands. On August 15, a week after their landing, a French schooner named Tamara arrives at Roroya to collect them. The crew says emotional farewells to the islanders who have hosted them so generously. They carefully load the salvaged remains of Kon-Tiki aboard the schooner, determined to preserve what they can of the raft that carried them across an ocean. The voyage to Tahiti takes several days, giving the crew time to decompress, to begin processing what they have accomplished. They are celebrities now, their story transmitted around the world, their names known to millions who have followed the expedition through radio reports and newspaper articles. But they remain humble, understanding that their journey's real significance lies not in personal fame but in what it reveals about human history and capability. Tahiti welcomes them with enthusiasm. A crowd gathers at the wharf as Tamara docks, cheering and waving. Officials from the French colonial government greet them formally. Reporters bombard them with questions. Photographers capture every moment. Thor and his crew are overwhelmed by the attention, unused to crowds after so long in isolation. They are given accommodations, time to rest and clean up properly for the first time in months. They shave their beards, cut their hair, don clean clothes. Looking in mirrors, they barely recognize themselves. 3 months at sea has left its mark: tanned skin, leaner bodies, eyes that have seen things few people will ever witness. The French authorities help arrange transport back to Norway, but first there is work to do. The remains of Kon-Tiki must be preserved. Thor wants the raft displayed in a museum someday, tangible evidence of their achievement. Workers carefully transport the balsa logs and other salvaged materials to a warehouse, where they can be stored until arrangements are made to ship them to Norway. Thor also begins writing. The story of the expedition must be told in detail, not just through newspaper accounts but through a comprehensive book that explains the theory, describes the construction of the raft, documents every day of the voyage, and presents the scientific findings. He fills notebooks with observations, memories, descriptions, dialogue reconstructed from journals kept during the journey. The film footage must also be developed and edited. The crew shot thousands of feet of film during the voyage, documenting the raft's performance, marine life encounters, daily routines, the storm, the landing. This footage will form the basis for a documentary that can bring the expedition to life for audiences who can only imagine what crossing the Pacific on a raft entails. Weeks pass in Tahiti as these tasks are completed. The crew scatters somewhat, some men eager to return home immediately, others content to explore Polynesia now that they have actually reached it. Thor remains focused on his mission. The physical journey is complete, but the intellectual journey continues. He needs to analyze the data, formulate conclusions, present findings in ways that will persuade skeptical scholars. The work in Tahiti is methodical and demanding. Thor establishes a base of operations in a rented building where he can spread out Herman's notebooks, Eric's navigation charts, his own journals, and the expedition's photographs. He spends days reconstructing the journey chronologically, matching entries from different sources, identifying patterns and significant events, building a comprehensive record of everything they experienced. Herman works alongside him, translating raw data into scientific observations. The measurements of wind speed and direction, recorded multiple times daily throughout the voyage, reveal patterns that confirm the trade wind's remarkable consistency. The water temperature readings show the progression from the cold Humboldt Current near South America to warmer equatorial waters mid-journey, then into the slightly cooler conditions approaching Polynesia. The wave height data documents both typical conditions and the extreme swells encountered during storms. Eric contributes his navigational calculations, showing the raft's position day by day across 101 days at sea. Plotting these positions on a large chart creates a wavy line across the Pacific, revealing how currents and winds combine to push them inexorably westward. The line shows relatively straight progress during calm periods and wild deviations during storms, but the overall direction remains constant, west toward Polynesia. The photography presents its own challenges. The film was shot under difficult conditions, often with salt-encrusted lenses, shaky hands, and poor lighting. Some footage is unusable, ruined by water damage or exposure problems. But much of it is spectacular: flying fish gliding past the camera, dolphins racing alongside the raft, the great whale shark circling beneath transparent water, storms approaching with cinematic drama, the crew's daily activities showing life aboard a primitive vessel. Thor hires a local photographer to develop the still images. These photographs will be crucial for the book and for scientific presentations. Each image is examined, catalogued, dated, and matched to journal entries describing the moment captured. Some photos become iconic: Thor at the steering oar, silhouetted against a Pacific sunset, the painted Kon-Tiki face on the sail, fierce and determined, the raft from a distance, tiny against vast ocean, the crew gathered on deck, bearded and weathered and triumphant. As the documentation work progresses, Thor begins drafting the book's outline. It must accomplish multiple goals simultaneously: tell a compelling adventure story that will appeal to general readers, present scientific evidence that will satisfy scholars, explain the theory that motivated the expedition, and document every aspect of the raft's construction and performance. Balancing these different audiences and purposes requires careful planning. He decides to structure the book chronologically, beginning with his time on Fatu Hiva when the theory first crystallized, proceeding through the expedition's planning and preparation, following the journey day by day, and concluding with landfall and aftermath. This structure allows readers to experience the expedition as the crew did, building from uncertainty through achievement to vindication. The writing itself proves therapeutic. Reliving the journey through words helps Thor process what they accomplished, understand its significance, place it in context. He writes of the terror during storms and the beauty of calm days, of hunger and satisfaction, of loneliness and camaraderie. He captures the sensory experiences, the constant dampness, the salt taste on lips, the sound of waves against balsa logs, the smell of fish and sun-heated canvas. Bengt Danielsson, the crew member most interested in anthropological aspects, works on a separate project analyzing what the expedition reveals about ancient voyaging. He examines the raft's performance data, comparing it to descriptions of South American rafts in Spanish colonial documents. The match is remarkably close. The speeds recorded during Kon-Tiki's voyage, the raft's behavior in different sea states, its maneuverability using centerboards and steering oar, all align with what conquistadores wrote about vessels they observed off the coasts of Ecuador and Peru. Bengt also studies Polynesian oral traditions more deeply, searching for any references that might hint at South American contact. He finds fragments that interest him: legends of fair-skinned gods arriving from the east, stories of strange people who brought new plants, references to voyages toward the rising sun. Most scholars interpret these as mythology or distorted memories of migrations within Polynesia, but Bengt wonders if some might preserve actual historical events, the arrival of South American voyagers who integrated into Polynesian society and whose stories became legend over generations. The sweet potato presents the most compelling botanical evidence. This plant, native to South America and called kumara by Polynesians, was cultivated throughout Polynesia before any European contact. How did it cross the Pacific? Thor's theory offers one explanation: South American voyagers brought it. Critics offer alternatives: birds might have carried seeds, or Polynesians might have sailed to South America and brought it back. Bengt recognizes that the botanical evidence alone cannot resolve the question, but it definitely indicates some form of contact occurred. Knut and Torstein work on technical documentation of the radio equipment's performance. Their detailed logs show that amateur radio provided reliable communication across thousands of miles despite the challenging environment. The fact that they maintained contact with operators throughout the Americas, relaying position reports and receiving news from home, demonstrates that even primitive expeditions can benefit from modern safety equipment without compromising experimental validity. They document every contact made during the voyage, creating a log that will be valuable for radio operators interested in long-distance communication under difficult conditions. The challenges they faced: maintaining equipment in constant dampness, generating power with a hand-cranked dynamo, extending battery life through careful management, provide useful information for anyone planning similar journeys. As December 1947 approaches, the crew prepares for departure. The remains of Kon-Tiki have been carefully packed for shipping to Norway. The documentation is organized and secured. Final interviews with French colonial officials and Tahitian residents are completed. Arrangements are made for transport to Panama, where they will cross the canal and continue to New York before finally returning to Norway. The parting from Tahiti is bittersweet. The island has been their home for nearly 4 months, a place of recovery and reflection after the intensity of the voyage. They have made friends here, explored the island's beauty, immersed themselves in Polynesian culture in ways impossible during their brief stop at Roroya. Some crew members, particularly Bengt, consider staying longer, but the pull of home and family proves stronger. The journey home by conventional ship takes weeks but feels anticlimactic after crossing the Pacific on a raft. The crew members spread throughout the vessel, occupying regular cabins, eating in dining rooms, walking on stable decks. Everything seems strange and artificial after months of primitive conditions. They find themselves nostalgic for the raft's simplicity, for the immediate connection to the ocean, for the stripped-down existence that revealed what truly matters in life. They pass through the Panama Canal, that engineering marvel that connects 2 oceans, and enter the Caribbean. The change from Pacific to Atlantic feels symbolically significant, as if they are leaving behind the realm of their adventure and returning to the everyday world of jobs and responsibilities. They stand at the rail watching Caribbean islands pass, comparing them mentally to Pacific atolls, recognizing similarities and differences, processing how the voyage has changed their perspectives on geography and culture. In New York, they are treated as celebrities. American media is fascinated by the expedition, by these Norwegians who crossed the Pacific on a primitive raft. Thor gives interviews and radio addresses, repeatedly explaining the theory and the voyage, answering the same questions with patient enthusiasm. The crew appears on television, still a relatively new medium, bringing the story to audiences who can see their sun-weathered faces and bearded appearances, visual proof of their ordeal. American scientists invite Thor to present findings at various institutions. He speaks at Columbia University, at the American Museum of Natural History, at the National Geographic Society headquarters in Washington. These presentations are cordial but reveal the skepticism that still exists in academic circles. Scholars acknowledge the expedition's achievement while questioning its interpretative significance. Yes, a balsa raft can cross the Pacific, but does that prove ancient South Americans did so? Correlation is not causation, they remind him. Possibility is not probability. Thor expected this response. He knows that one expedition cannot overturn decades of scholarship. But he believes he has opened a door, created space for new thinking, forced scholars to reconsider assumptions they previously held as certainties. The Kon-Tiki expedition has proven that ancient peoples were more capable than modern academics assumed, that oceans were not absolute barriers, that contact between distant cultures deserves investigation rather than dismissal. The transatlantic crossing to Norway feels like the expedition's true end. They are returning to their starting point, completing a circle that began with Thor's theory and an impossible dream and ends with vindication and fame. The Atlantic seems small after the Pacific, the voyage quick after months of drifting on Kon-Tiki. But it gives them time to prepare psychologically for what awaits in Norway. Oslo welcomes them as heroes in January 1948, nearly 9 months after they departed from Peru. The entire city seems to turn out, lining streets, waving Norwegian flags, cheering their return. The government organizes an official reception. King Haakon VII receives them personally, awarding medals and congratulating them on bringing honor to Norway. The ceremony is elaborate and moving, a nation celebrating 6 of its sons who dared greatly and succeeded magnificently. But the celebration also feels surreal to the crew. They are the same men who departed quietly for South America a year earlier, treated by many as foolish dreamers pursuing a fantasy. Now they are national treasures, their faces on magazine covers, their story known worldwide. The transformation is disorienting, the attention overwhelming. Thor in particular struggles with celebrity. He is naturally private, more comfortable with ideas than crowds, more interested in research than publicity. But he recognizes that fame provides a platform for promoting his theories, for ensuring that the expedition's findings receive serious consideration. He accepts the burden of celebrity as the price of achieving his goals. The book becomes his focus throughout 1948. He writes obsessively, filling pages with descriptions and analysis, recreating the journey with vivid detail. He wants readers to feel what it was like to drift on Kon-Tiki, to understand the raft's motion, to experience the isolation and wonder of 101 days at sea. He includes Herman's data, Eric's navigation notes, extracts from everyone's journals, creating a comprehensive document that is part adventure narrative, part scientific report, part philosophical meditation on human exploration. The Norwegian edition is published in late 1948 under the title Kon-Tiki Ekspedisjonen. It becomes an immediate bestseller, selling out its first printing within days, going into multiple reprints, dominating bookstores and conversations throughout Norway. Norwegians are proud of Thor and his crew, celebrating them as exemplars of national character, brave, resourceful, willing to challenge conventions, capable of achieving what others thought impossible. The English translation appears in 1950 as The Kon-Tiki Expedition, by Raft Across the South Seas, published by Rand McNally in the United States and Allen and Unwin in Britain. It becomes an international phenomenon, topping bestseller lists, translated into dozens of languages, eventually selling more than 20 million copies worldwide. The book brings the Pacific adventure to audiences everywhere, inspiring countless readers with its message that human determination can overcome extraordinary obstacles. The book's success is matched by the documentary film. Thor and a professional editor assemble the expedition's footage into a coherent narrative, adding narration based on the book, including interviews and behind-the-scenes material shot in Tahiti. The film is released in 1950 and proves just as successful as the book, screening in theaters worldwide, winning critical acclaim, and ultimately receiving the Academy Award for Best Documentary Feature at the 1952 Oscars. The Oscar ceremony represents a pinnacle of recognition. Thor travels to Hollywood to accept the award, standing on stage before America's entertainment elite, holding the golden statuette, thanking the crew and everyone who supported the expedition. The award validates their achievement in a way that no academic recognition could, bringing the story to mainstream audiences who might never read scientific papers but who respond to adventure and human triumph. The Ra expeditions attract international crews, reflecting Thor's evolving view that ancient seafaring was a universal human capability rather than the achievement of specific cultures. The crews include members from Egypt, Russia, America, Italy, and other nations, working together to sail a primitive boat across a major ocean. Thor sees this cooperation as a model for international relations, a demonstration that people from different backgrounds can unite around shared goals and mutual respect. In 1977, Thor organizes the Tigris expedition, sailing a reed boat from Iraq through the Arabian Gulf, around the Arabian Peninsula, and across the Indian Ocean to demonstrate possible ancient connections between Mesopotamian and Indus Valley civilizations. This voyage ends dramatically when Thor burns the Tigris in protest against wars raging in the region, using the expedition's finale as a political statement about the need for peace and cooperation. Throughout these later expeditions, Thor remains committed to hands-on experimental archaeology, to testing theories through direct experience rather than relying solely on artifact analysis and textual interpretation. His approach influences a generation of researchers who adopt similar methods, building replica ships, recreating ancient technologies, conducting practical experiments to understand how past peoples lived and traveled. But the Kon-Tiki expedition remains his most famous achievement, the voyage that established his reputation and methods. Even when later genetic studies complicate his theories about Polynesian origins, demonstrating that the primary settlement came from Southeast Asia exactly as mainstream scholars always maintained, the Kon-Tiki story retains its power. The specific theory might be wrong in its details, but the underlying insight that ancient peoples were capable seafarers who could cross oceans remains valid and important. Modern research has confirmed that some contact did occur between Polynesians and Native Americans, though probably in the opposite direction from what theorized. Genetic studies published in 2020 found evidence of Polynesian DNA in some Native American populations and vice versa, indicating that Polynesian voyagers reached South America around 1200 CE and likely brought back sweet potatoes and possibly other plants and people. These findings vindicate Thor's fundamental insight that the Pacific Ocean did not prevent contact between cultures, though they suggest that highly skilled Polynesian navigators sailing sophisticated double-hulled canoes were more likely to have initiated contact than South Americans drifting on balsa rafts. The scientific consensus today acknowledges that Thor Heyerdahl was both right and wrong. He was right that contact occurred between South America and Polynesia. He was right that ancient peoples were capable of remarkable seafaring feats. He was right that scholars too quickly dismissed theories of transoceanic contact. But he was wrong about the direction of primary settlement, wrong about white-skinned gods from South America founding Polynesian civilization, wrong in his belief that Polynesians could not sail against winds and currents. This mixed verdict is perhaps appropriate for a figure who occupied the boundary between mainstream science and popular adventure, between rigorous research and speculative theory, between academic caution and bold experimentation. Thor Heyerdahl was never an easy person to categorize. He was an anthropologist without formal training in anthropology, an explorer who used exploration to make scholarly arguments, a theorist who tested hypotheses through action rather than analysis. His legacy extends beyond specific theories about Polynesian origins. He demonstrated that important questions could be addressed through experimental methods, that recreating ancient technologies provided insights unavailable through traditional archaeological approaches. He showed that science could be adventurous and accessible, that research findings could be communicated through compelling narratives that engaged general audiences. He proved that individuals with vision and determination could make significant contributions to human knowledge even without the blessing of established institutions. The Kon-Tiki expedition inspired countless later adventures. People built rafts and sailed them across various oceans, testing different theories about ancient voyaging. In 1973, a Spanish expedition led by Vital Alsa successfully sailed 3 balsa rafts from Ecuador to Australia, covering even greater distances than Kon-Tiki. In 2006, the Tangaroa expedition recreated the Kon-Tiki voyage using a newly built balsa raft, completing the journey in 70 days and demonstrating improved understanding of how to sail such vessels using centerboards effectively. These later expeditions built on Thor's foundation, refining techniques, collecting better data, contributing to ongoing understanding of ancient seafaring capabilities. Each voyage added to the body of knowledge about how primitive watercraft perform at sea, how ancient peoples might have navigated, what challenges they faced and how they overcame them. The experimental archaeology movement that Thor pioneered has produced valuable insights into ancient life that would have been impossible to gain through conventional methods alone. Educational institutions around the world use the Kon-Tiki story to teach students about Pacific history, human migration, scientific methods, and the importance of questioning assumptions. The expedition demonstrates how to formulate testable hypotheses, how to design experiments that address specific questions, how to collect and analyze data, how to present findings in ways that withstand scrutiny. It also teaches that failure to prove one's original theory does not mean an experiment failed, that unexpected results can be as valuable as confirmation of predictions. The story resonates particularly strongly with young people who dream of adventure, who feel constrained by conventional expectations, who wonder if it is still possible to explore and discover in a world that seems fully mapped and understood. Thor Heyerdahl's life demonstrates that exploration continues, that important questions remain unanswered, that individuals with curiosity and courage can still make meaningful contributions to human understanding. The 6 men who sailed Kon-Tiki showed that age is not a barrier to adventure. Thor was 33 when the expedition departed, the others ranging from late 20s to mid-30s, old enough to have established careers and responsibilities but young enough to risk those securities for an uncertain venture. Their willingness to set aside normal life for months of danger and discomfort, to pursue a vision that most people considered foolish, inspired others to take their own risks, to follow their own dreams, to believe that extraordinary achievements remain possible. The expedition also demonstrated the power of teamwork and diversity. 6 men with different skills and personalities, from different backgrounds, united by shared purpose, managed to live together in extremely cramped conditions for more than 3 months without serious conflict. They learned to appreciate each other's strengths, compensate for each other's weaknesses, communicate effectively even when exhausted or frightened or bored. Their success depended not on any individual's brilliance but on their collective ability to function as a cohesive unit. This lesson about cooperation remains relevant in an era when complex problems require interdisciplinary collaboration, when solving challenges demands combining expertise from multiple fields, when success depends on people from different backgrounds working together toward common goals. The Kon-Tiki crew's ability to maintain morale and effectiveness under extreme conditions offers a model for any team facing difficult challenges. The environmental aspect of the expedition has gained renewed significance in recent decades as awareness of ocean health has increased. The crew documented the Pacific's incredible marine biodiversity, the abundance of fish and other sea life, the health of ecosystems that supported both human voyagers and countless other species. Comparing their observations from 1947 with current conditions reveals troubling declines in ocean health caused by overfishing, pollution, climate change, and other human impacts. Thor himself became increasingly concerned about environmental issues in his later years, recognizing that the oceans he loved and studied were under threat. He spoke about the need to protect marine environments, to preserve the conditions that made ancient voyaging possible and that continue to support billions of people who depend on the ocean for food and livelihoods. His advocacy helped raise awareness about ocean conservation, contributing to movements that continue working to protect marine ecosystems. The psychological dimensions of the Kon-Tiki voyage have also attracted study. Researchers interested in isolation, in group dynamics under stress, in human adaptation to confined spaces and monotonous environments have analyzed the crew's experiences. The expedition provides a case study in how people cope with extended separation from normal life, how they maintain mental health in challenging conditions, how they find meaning and purpose in situations that could easily become overwhelming. The crew's journals and later interviews reveal various coping strategies. Some men focused on their specific tasks, throwing themselves into scientific observations or equipment maintenance. Others found solace in creativity, writing, sketching, playing music. All emphasized the importance of maintaining routines, of marking time's passage through regular activities, of setting small goals that provided structure to days that could otherwise blur into sameness. Humor played a crucial role in maintaining morale. The crew joked constantly, teasing each other, finding absurdity in their situation, laughing at the ridiculousness of 6 modern men floating across the Pacific on balsa logs. This humor diffused tensions, prevented small annoyances from escalating into serious conflicts, reminded everyone not to take themselves too seriously even while pursuing a serious scientific goal. The crew also emphasized the importance of respecting each other's need for solitude. On a raft only 45 feet long and 18 feet wide, true privacy was impossible. but they developed informal rules about when to leave someone alone, when someone needed to be drawn out of brooding, when to engage in group activities, and when to allow individuals to retreat into their own thoughts. This emotional intelligence, this sensitivity to psychological needs, proved as important to the expedition's success as any technical skill. The spiritual dimension of the voyage, though rarely discussed explicitly in scientific accounts, emerges in the crew's personal writings and later reflections. Many spoke of transcendent experiences, moments when the beauty and vastness of the ocean, the brilliance of stars, the power of storms, the grace of marine life, produced feelings of awe and connection to something larger than themselves. These experiences, difficult to quantify or analyze scientifically, were nonetheless real and significant to the men who lived them. Thor himself, though trained as a scientist, never entirely abandoned a romantic, almost mystical view of the ocean and human exploration. He saw the sea as sacred space where modern people could reconnect with ancient truths, where the thin veneer of civilization stripped away to reveal fundamental human capacities and limitations. The ocean-tested people revealed their true characters, forced them to confront themselves without the distractions and defenses of normal life. This philosophical aspect of Thor's work sometimes put him at odds with academics who preferred purely materialist explanations, who were uncomfortable with language that suggested spiritual dimensions to human experience. But it resonated with general audiences who recognized that exploration involves more than gathering data, that journeys into unknown territories are also journeys into the self, that understanding human history requires acknowledging the full range of human experience, including those aspects that resist scientific measurement. As Thor aged, he reflected increasingly on what the Kon-Tiki expedition meant in the context of his entire life. He recognized that nothing he did afterward quite matched the purity and impact of that first great adventure. The Ra and Tigris expeditions were important, his archaeological work on Easter Island significant, his numerous books influential. But Kon-Tiki remained special, the moment when an impossible dream became reality, when a controversial theory was tested under the most demanding conditions, when 6 men proved that ancient peoples were far more capable than modern scholars assumed. In his final years, Thor returned often to the Kon-Tiki Museum, walking slowly among the exhibits, standing before the raft that had carried him across the Pacific half a century earlier. The balsa logs, dried and preserved, showed their age and the stresses they endured. The rope, carefully conserved, retained its strength in testament to ancient craftsmen's skill. The sail, with its painted Kon-Tiki face, stared westward still, toward islands and dreams and the endless questions that drove Thor throughout his remarkable life. Thor Heyerdahl died on April 18, 2002, at age 87, in Colomiceri, Italy, far from Norway but in a place he loved. His death marked the end of an era, the passing of one of the last great explorer-adventurers whose expeditions captured global imagination. News of his death prompted tributes from around the world, recognition that someone extraordinary had departed, that a particular kind of courage and vision had been lost. His funeral was held in Oslo, attended by Norwegian royalty, government officials, fellow explorers, scientists, and ordinary people who had been inspired by his adventures. The ceremony celebrated a life lived fully, a mind that questioned constantly, a spirit that refused to accept limitations imposed by others. Thor was buried with honors befitting a national hero, his coffin draped with the Norwegian flag, his achievements recognized as contributing to his country's glory and to human knowledge. But his true monument stands in Oslo still, the Kon-Tiki raft, preserved forever, drawing visitors from every corner of the world to stand before it and marvel. Children press against the railings, eyes wide with wonder. Adults shake their heads in disbelief. Everyone leaves understanding something fundamental about human capability, about the power of ideas and determination, about what becomes possible when people refuse to be told that something cannot be done. The raft sits in dimly lit space, spotlights illuminating its weathered logs and frayed rope, museum placards explaining its construction and voyage. But the real story cannot be captured by words or even by standing before the actual vessel. The real story lives in imagination, in each visitor's mental recreation of what it must have been like to drift across 4,300 miles of open ocean on this primitive platform, to trust your life to balsa and hemp, to believe that ancient peoples could have done the same. And perhaps that is Thor Heyerdahl's greatest legacy, not proving any particular theory about Polynesian origins, but expanding human imagination, reminding us that history is not fixed and certain, that mysteries remain unsolved, that ancient peoples deserve our respect and wonder, that oceans connect as much as they divide, that the impossible is often merely the not yet attempted, that adventure and discovery remain possible for those brave enough to pursue them. Herman's weather and navigation data proves invaluable. His careful measurements show that the Humboldt current and trade winds create a natural highway from South America to Polynesia, that any vessel caught in these forces would be carried westward with minimal need for active navigation. The data supports Thor's argument that ancient rafts, even primitive ones, could reach Polynesia simply by yielding to natural forces. Eric's navigation records show that celestial observation alone, without modern instruments, could guide voyagers across open ocean with acceptable accuracy. Ancient peoples, with their intimate knowledge of stars and natural signs, could have maintained course and judged their position well enough to find island groups thousands of miles from their starting point. The raft's performance exceeded expectations in every way. The balsa logs remained buoyant even after absorbing water. The hemp rope stayed strong despite months of saltwater exposure. The simple construction proved more durable than complex engineering. These findings suggest that Spanish chroniclers' descriptions of South American rafts undertaking long voyages were accurate, not exaggerated. But Thor knows that data alone will not convince his critics. Some scholars are already dismissing the expedition as a publicity stunt that proves nothing about ancient migrations. They argue that modern equipment like the radio and sextant, modern food supplies, modern knowledge of Pacific geography, all made the voyage possible in ways unavailable to ancient peoples. Thor counters that the radio was for safety and documentation, not navigation. The raft itself never used power or modern propulsion. The sextant simply confirmed what ancient star navigation could achieve. The food supplies supplemented fishing, which ancient voyagers also relied upon. The fundamental question is whether a balsa raft can cross the Pacific, and the answer is unambiguously yes. The scientific establishment's resistance frustrates Thor, but he understands it. Scholars have invested careers in theories of Polynesian origins from Asia. Accepting even the possibility of South American contact would require reconsidering decades of research, potentially invalidating published papers and established reputations. Human nature resists such upheavals, preferring incremental adjustments to revolutionary reinterpretations. But Thor also has allies. Some anthropologists and archaeologists admit that the Kon-Tiki expedition raises legitimate questions. The presence of sweet potatoes in Polynesia before European contact has always been puzzling, since this plant is native to South America. Linguistic similarities between some Polynesian and South American words deserve investigation. Certain architectural and artistic parallels between cultures separated by thousands of miles of ocean merit consideration. Modern DNA studies, conducted decades after Thor's death, would reveal that Polynesians did indeed have some genetic contact with Native Americans, though the interaction was limited and occurred relatively late in Polynesian history. These findings neither fully vindicate nor fully refute Thor's theories, but they confirm that contact between South America and Polynesia did occur, validating his fundamental insight that the Pacific was not an absolute barrier. By early October 1947, the Kon-Tiki crew is ready to return home. They book passage on a ship bound for Panama, where they will cross the canal and continue to New York, then finally to Norway. The journey home takes weeks, reversing the route they sailed in a few short months on their raft, a reminder of just how remarkable their achievement was. The homecoming in Norway is triumphant. Crowds line the streets of Oslo. Dignitaries offer congratulations. The Norwegian government awards medals. Thor and his crew are national heroes, men who brought glory to their small country through courage and determination. But Thor does not rest on his laurels. He immediately begins work on the book and documentary. The book, titled The Kon-Tiki Expedition, by Raft Across the South Seas, is published in 1948 and becomes an international bestseller. It is translated into dozens of languages, selling millions of copies, inspiring generations with its tale of adventure and scientific inquiry. The documentary film, assembled from the expedition's footage, is released in 1950. It wins the Academy Award for Best Documentary Feature, bringing the voyage to audiences worldwide. The film's narration, written by Thor and based on the book, captures both the physical journey and the intellectual quest that motivated it. The success of the book and film transforms Thor Heyerdahl from controversial theorist to celebrated explorer. He uses this platform to continue his research, conducting further expeditions that explore human migration and ancient seafaring. He builds reed boats based on ancient designs and sails them across the Atlantic, demonstrating that even more primitive vessels than Kon-Tiki could cross oceans. The remains of the Kon-Tiki raft are eventually transported to Norway and installed in a specially built museum in Oslo. The Kon-Tiki Museum becomes one of Norway's most visited attractions, allowing people to see the actual balsa logs that crossed the Pacific, to understand the raft's construction, to appreciate the scale of the achievement. The 5 men who accompanied Thor on the voyage return to their normal lives, though they remain forever connected by their shared experience. Herman Watzinger continues his engineering work, applying lessons learned on the raft to other projects. Eric Hesselberg publishes his own account of the voyage, illustrated with his sketches, offering a different perspective on the journey. Knut Haugland goes on to serve as director of the Kon-Tiki Museum, dedicating decades to preserving the expedition's legacy. He becomes the last surviving crew member, passing away in 2009 at age 92, having spent his entire life telling the story of those 101 days at sea. Torstein Robbie continues working in communications, his expertise in radio contributing to technological advances. Bengt Danielsen remains in Polynesia, settling in Tahiti, writing extensively about Polynesian culture and becoming one of the world's leading authorities on the region. Each man carries the expedition with him, shaped by those months of isolation and adventure. The scientific debates continue for decades. As new evidence emerges from genetics, linguistics, archaeology, and anthropology, the picture of Polynesian settlement becomes more complex. The mainstream view remains that Polynesians originated from Southeast Asia, spreading eastward across the Pacific using sophisticated sailing canoes and navigation techniques. But the possibility of some contact with South America is no longer dismissed out of hand. Modern research reveals that Polynesians reached South America, bringing chickens to the continent before European contact. They may have brought back sweet potatoes, bottled goods, and other South American plants. Some genetic mixing occurred, though on a small scale. These findings suggest that Polynesians, master navigators, could sail both to and from South America, unlike Thor's theory which suggested one-way drift voyages from east to west. But these discoveries do not diminish the Kon-Tiki expedition's significance. Thor Heyerdahl proved that ancient seafaring was more capable than modern people assumed, that seemingly impossible journeys could be accomplished with primitive technology and determination. He demonstrated that human history is more complex and interconnected than scholars believed, that oceans were highways as well as barriers, that ancient peoples were more adventurous and capable than we give them credit for. The Kon-Tiki expedition also inspired a generation to think differently about exploration and science. It showed that important questions could be addressed through experimental archaeology, by recreating ancient technologies and testing them under real conditions. It demonstrated that adventure and science could coexist, that rigorous research could unfold in the context of daring journeys. Countless explorers and adventurers cite Kon-Tiki as inspiration. The expedition sparked renewed interest in ancient seafaring, in primitive navigation techniques, in the relationship between humans and oceans. It encouraged people to question accepted wisdom, to test theories through action, to believe that individuals with vision and courage could contribute to human knowledge. Thor Heyerdahl's later expeditions built on the Kon-Tiki foundation. His Ra expeditions, sailing reed boats across the Atlantic, demonstrated that ancient Egyptians could have reached the Americas. His Tigris expedition, sailing a reed boat from Iraq through the Indian Ocean, explored possible connections between ancient Mesopotamian and Indus Valley civilizations. Each voyage tested theories about human migration and ancient seafaring, each one generating controversy and inspiring admiration. Thor lived until 2002, dying at age 87 in Italy, far from the Norwegian homeland where his journey began. His legacy is complex and contested. Some scholars view him as a brilliant innovator who challenged orthodoxy and opened new avenues of research. Others see him as a popularizer who oversimplified complex issues and promoted theories unsupported by evidence. Both perspectives contain truth. What cannot be disputed is that the Kon-Tiki expedition captured imaginations worldwide, that millions of people learned about Polynesian culture and ancient seafaring through Thor's books and films, that his adventures inspired countless others to pursue their own dreams of exploration and discovery. In an age increasingly dominated by technology and specialization, Thor Heyerdahl reminded the world that human courage, determination, and ingenuity remain relevant, that great questions can still be addressed through direct experience and bold action. The 6 men who sailed Kon-Tiki demonstrated that the human spirit, when properly motivated, can overcome extraordinary challenges. They showed that primitive does not mean inferior, that ancient peoples possessed knowledge and skills we have lost in our modern sophistication. They proved that the ocean, vast and dangerous as it is, could not prevent human contact and exchange, that isolated civilizations were never truly isolated as long as some individuals possessed the courage to venture beyond known horizons. Today, more than 75 years after Kon-Tiki's voyage, the raft remains on display in Oslo, its weathered balsa logs and frayed hemp ropes silent testimony to an incredible journey. Visitors from around the world stand before it, trying to imagine what it would be like to spend 101 days on such a primitive vessel, to drift for thousands of miles across the largest ocean on Earth, to trust your life to logs and rope and ancient wisdom. Children stare at the raft with wide eyes, asking their parents if people really crossed the ocean on that. Adults shake their heads in amazement, recognizing that they themselves would never attempt such a journey, that it requires a special kind of person to even conceive of such an adventure, much less carry it out. The Kon-Tiki expedition reminds us that history is not a closed book, that we have not answered all questions about our past. New discoveries continually revise our understanding of ancient migrations, of human capabilities, of the connections between distant cultures. Thor Heyerdahl may have been wrong about many specifics of his theory, but he was right about the fundamental insight that humans have always been explorers, wanderers, seafarers who pushed boundaries and crossed barriers that seemed impossible. The Pacific Ocean, which once appeared to be an unbridgeable gulf between continents, now reveals itself as a highway that ancient peoples navigated with skill and daring. The Polynesians who settled islands scattered across millions of square miles of ocean were among history's greatest navigators, possessing knowledge of stars, currents, winds, and wave patterns that allowed them to find tiny specks of land in vast emptiness. But South Americans, too, were seafarers. They built rafts capable of extended voyages. They ventured far from shore, fishing and trading, exploring and discovering. If some of these voyagers, by accident or design, reached Polynesian islands, they would have brought their plants, their stories, their genes. They would have become part of the complex web of human migration that populated every habitable corner of Earth. Kon-Tiki proved this was possible. 6 modern men, using ancient techniques, crossed the Pacific and survived. If they could do it with minimal preparation and incomplete knowledge, surely ancient peoples, who spent their entire lives understanding the ocean, who learned from childhood to read its signs and predict its moods, who accumulated generations of experience and wisdom, could have accomplished the same feat. This is Thor Heyerdahl's enduring contribution. Not proving any specific theory of Polynesian origins, but expanding our sense of what ancient peoples could achieve. Opening our minds to possibilities we too quickly dismiss. Reminding us that humans have always been more capable, more adventurous, more interconnected than we assume when we project our own limitations backward onto our ancestors. The 6 men of Kon-Tiki lived for those 101 days in a way that few modern people ever experience. They woke each morning to limitless horizons, to the play of sun on water, to the company of dolphins and flying fish. They worked together, relying on each other completely, forming bonds that transcended ordinary friendship. They faced danger without modern safety nets, trusting in primitive technology and their own resourcefulness. They learned what ancient mariners knew, that the ocean, for all its dangers, can be crossed, that persistence and patience overcome obstacles that seem insurmountable, that the human body and spirit can endure far more than we imagine in our comfortable modern lives. They discovered that simplicity has power, that reducing life to essentials, shelter, food, water, companionship, purpose, reveals what truly matters. When they stepped onto that beach at Raroya after 101 days at sea, they had proven more than a theory about ancient migrations. They had proven something about human potential, about what becomes possible when people commit completely to a vision, when they refuse to accept limitations imposed by others, when they trust in themselves and each other and the accumulated wisdom of ancestors who faced similar challenges. The story of Kon-Tiki is ultimately a story about faith, faith in an idea, faith in ancient technologies, faith in the ocean's patterns, faith in human capability. Thor Heyerdahl had faith that his theory deserved testing, that scholars' dismissals were premature, that he could build a raft and sail it across the Pacific. His crew had faith in Thor's vision and in each other, faith that they would survive, that the journey was worth the risk. That faith was vindicated. The raft carried them across 4,300 miles of ocean. The balsa logs remained afloat. The hemp rope held. The sail captured wind. The steering oar provided control. Ancient technologies worked exactly as Thor believed they would. And 6 modern men experienced something their contemporaries could barely imagine: the slow, steady drift across an ocean on a primitive raft, the rhythm of days marked by sun and stars, the simplicity and complexity of life at sea. For those who have never experienced such adventure, who live their entire lives on solid ground, who travel by car and plane and ship, who navigate using GPS and maps, who take for granted the technologies that connect and protect us, the Kon-Tiki story offers a glimpse into a different way of being. It shows us that humans can survive and even thrive with minimal resources, that danger and discomfort can be endured when purpose provides motivation, that the most profound experiences often come from stepping beyond comfortable boundaries into unknown territories. The ocean that Kon-Tiki crossed remains largely unchanged from Thor's time. The same currents flow, the same winds blow, the same stars mark the sky at night. The Humboldt Current still carries cold water northward along South America's coast before turning westward across the Pacific. The trade winds still blow from the southeast, pushing everything toward Polynesia. The ocean still teems with life, flying fish and dolphins, sharks and whales, squid and tuna, the same species that accompanied Kon-Tiki on its journey. If someone wanted to replicate the voyage today, the challenges would be essentially identical. The distance remains 4,300 miles. The average drift rate would still be 1.5 knots. The time required would still be approximately 100 days. The dangers, storms, reefs, equipment failure, dehydration, injury, would be the same. No modern technology can fundamentally alter the experience of crossing the Pacific on a primitive raft. The ocean does not care about historical era, it treats all vessels according to the same physical laws. This timelessness is part of what makes the Kon-Tiki story enduringly powerful. It is not dated by technology or culture. It speaks to fundamental human experiences, courage in the face of danger, perseverance through difficulty, trust in companions, wonder at nature's magnificence, satisfaction in achieving what others said was impossible. These experiences transcend time and place. They are as relevant today as they were in 1947, as they were 1,500 years ago when ancient mariners may have made similar voyages. As we conclude this journey across time and ocean, as we return from the Pacific to our modern lives, let us carry with us something of what Thor Heyerdahl and his crew discovered. Let us remember that the impossible is often merely the not yet attempted, that ancient wisdom deserves respect, that human potential exceeds our usual assumptions, that adventure and discovery remain possible for those willing to step beyond familiar shores. The raft Kon-Tiki rests in its museum in Oslo, but its spirit sails on in everyone who dares to question accepted wisdom, who pursues a vision despite skepticism, who trusts in human capability and courage. Thor Heyerdahl's theory about Polynesian origins may never be fully accepted by scholars, but his demonstration of what humans can accomplish with primitive tools and determined hearts will inspire adventurers and dreamers for generations to come. 6 men on a balsa raft drifted across the Pacific Ocean and changed how we think about human history, about ancient peoples, about the barriers that separate cultures and the bridges that connect them. They proved that oceans are highways as well as barriers, that primitive does not mean incapable, that the past holds surprises we have yet to discover. Thank you for joining me on this journey across the Pacific, for drifting with Kon-Tiki through swells and storms, through days of blazing sun and nights of brilliant stars, from the coast of Peru to the reefs of Polynesia. If you enjoyed this story, please like and subscribe to support this channel and help others discover these tales of human exploration and courage. Now close your eyes and let your mind drift like a raft on gentle swells, rocking slowly under stars that guided ancient navigators, carried by currents that connect distant shores, part of an ocean that holds more stories than we will ever fully know. Sleep well, dream deeply, and remember that the horizon is never truly unreachable for those brave enough to sail toward it. Until next time, this is Sleep Orion, wishing you calm seas and following winds on whatever journey you pursue.